Welcome to the work session for the Municipal Council. We are convened in the City Center Conference Room. It is 12:06, and we will begin with a roll call.
Let's track it.
Gary Milburn.
Dave Connect.
Dave Sewell.
Amanda Erkenbrot.
Gary Winterton. David Hardy.
Kelsey Zarbon.
Kate Andrew.
George Stewart. Willie Parker. Isaac Axton.
Thank you. We'd like to especially welcome Gary and Amanda who are filling in for people today. We appreciate you being here. This meeting is being broadcast on YouTube, Provo City Council, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. Please be aware that the microphones in the room pick up noise and paper and other rustling objects. Further, be aware that microphones can pick up side conversations. We will begin with an opening prayer by Joe Hamlin, our intern. Thank you, Joe.
Our Father in heaven, we're grateful for this opportunity that we have to be able to, as a council, meet and discuss solutions to our city. We're grateful for the opportunities that we have to be able to serve. Ask that thy spirit might be upon us in friendship and love and foresight and all of our doings. We ask that thou might bless us to be able to do so in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Joe. It's proposed that we approve the following minutes: April 17th joint meeting with the Planning Commission and May 1st work meeting. Are there any additions or corrections or changes to those minutes that any of you would like to make? Seeing no changes, I declare these minutes approved by unanimous consent. We will we'll move on to item number 1. A discussion on the on funding options for Miss Provo and the parade float. And I will have the opportunity to introduce that along. You can help me with this, Mayor.
Yeah,
and I think the things that we're talking about for the most part right now is I'd like to start off the discussion with the float. And Mayor, you made the proposal, and I've talked. Well, no. Do you want to talk about that proposal, or would you like me to go ahead?
well, actually, what we did, and Wayne, you interject, we asked Scott Henderson to give us a breakdown on how much it would cost to take the float and completely manage it so that they don't have to worry about a driver, they don't have to worry about upkeep or anything. And he came up with a projected. Should we have Scott speak to it, or do you want to speak to it?
If you're prepared, Scott, that'd be fine, or I'd love to.
I got it. I just got it. So we looked at the 12 weekends, and I provided Dwayne our calculations on the whole thing. And what we came up with driver and spotters and fuel, we did not include things like if there's damage or something like that, we may have to address if those things happen. But we came to just a little over $12,000 for the summer, and that is paying staff overtime to be able to cover these needs throughout the summer. And I can email this out to.
I think I sent it to Gary. Did you get it, Gary?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
And as I looked at it, Scott, it seemed to be like it was about $1,000 for the 2 spotters, the driver, the transportation, getting everything out per parade.
It seems like that's how the number comes down.
That was the way it kind of. And how many parades have we done in the past?
10 to 14.
10 to 14. So we had 12. We kind of budgeted for 12.
Kind of in the middle. I don't know if that's oh yeah, reasonable.
So I didn't think we did that many. And do we need to do that many? I guess would be one of the questions. Is that important enough that we do 12 parades?
How many other cities send their floats to our parade? You know that number?
All of them.
All of them.
All the ones that we go to.
All the ones you go to. So,
yeah, they have theirs. We
so
did have a few outside, like BU and stuff.
So if we're going to 10 or 12, we're getting 10 or 12 back.
for kids.
Any other comments about that?
So just our thoughts were after discussing it, if you'll give us back the money to do the float, we'll take it.
And that money, you'd need more than we can give back, apparently, because it's 12, right now it's 21,000.
It's 21,000, including what's contributed to Miss Provo. So it's 11 for it's all in one number, but it's 11 for the float and 10 for Miss Provo.
What was the discussion I think that we put in the variance budget, $21,000 in the coming year?
For the float.
Float and the.
No, there's nothing in there for Miss Provo budget, 21,000. That's the problem.
21,000 has historically been 11 for the float and 10 for the Miss Provo pageant.
And so there's $21,000 in Parks and Rec department is telling us it's going to cost $10,000 to prepare the float, plus $1,000 a rate. $21,000 $20,000 rate to have 2 spotters, a driver, transporting back and forth. That's what the Parks and Rec feel that they can do it for. So that's why I said it's going to cost more money than we have got in our budget to do this. So we've got to come up with another $1,000 somewhere to do just the float. And we have not discussed Miss Provo at all yet. If we want the city to do it, and there are, Gary, I don't know if you've been involved in the discussions, and maybe you ought to take some lead, or Wayne, with the liability that the city is concerned about and why they weren't excited. Do you want to talk about that a minute?
Well, I think the concern has been that if this becomes a city service, then we are fully on the hook for the liability. If somebody else is driving our float, that has remained a question. So as we looked at it, with the limited visibility for the float and several recent incidents where we've had injuries at some parades, the thought was we need to equip two spotters with radio headsets that can communicate with the driver, so that there's clear protection, and we're not some child who runs out to get a saltwater taffy that's been dropped in the parade line doesn't get hit by our floating driver. So that was, we were kind of asked to do what's best practice and what we felt confident doing, and that was it. So again, when our comparatively deep pockets are on the line, I think we need to take an extra measure of precaution.
I applaud that. It's been mentioned that every time we send a vehicle out on city business, it's kind of the same thing.
Right.
It's different here because of the limited visibility, and I think best practice. I think this is the responsible thing to do, and I think perhaps once we get a year under our belt, maybe we'll find that the estimate was over, maybe it's under, but I think if we choose to, if we feel that there's value in having a parade and entering it into other parades, having a float and entering it into other parades, I think this is the cost of that activity, and we should do it responsibly.
More slow on the uptake. We own the float actually. That's one of our vehicles, and we have the employee driving it. Is that right?
Not today, but we have a volunteer driving it today. But under this scenario, we'd have a city employee driving it, and 2 city employees would be spotters.
I actually think it makes little difference under the current state of the case law. A volunteer is an employee for all intents and purposes. I think if we're driving it, it's our vehicle both as an insurance company and from a liability standpoint. So I think
we've been getting a steal, it sounds like, in the past, and I know that the Miss Provo people have not felt comfortable with that float situation, and that's one of the things that instigated this discussion early on in the year, is their discomfort around being responsible for that float. And I know that it's come back and we've talked with the attorneys, and they have felt uncomfortable with some of the situations around the float. Another cost that we are incurring, just it's not stated in Scott's $22,000, is the storage at the airport and the gas. Fuel was in it.
Not storage costs.
not storage costs. Just so the council is aware.
Can I say anything?
Yeah.
If you keep it in the broken hangar, they haven't been charging us. Because they can't rent it.
And I've talked with Steve about that, and he would like to fix that hangar and start collecting rent. If there's a possibility, that's rent that we are not getting as a city. And so it's an opportunity cost. So
what's the
it's not very much for a hangar down there. What is it? 250 or something like that? It's not very much at this point. I'd have to look and see.
Because the Astoria for a while was right over there in East Bay. They had that big garage.
And that's something that the administration has said they're willing to take on. They'll find a spot for us. We're grateful for that. So is there any other discussion around the float? And then I'll report to you and we can talk about Miss Provo after that.
Freedom Festival, how they give an opinion, or are they worried about losing all the floats, or
Yes.
they got a contingency plan if that would happen, or what?
They don't have a contingent. They are worried about the floats, the number of floats that are dwindling in the parades. And some parades are actually growing in number. Some people think that Provo's is the third largest parade in the state now, from what I've heard. I'm not buying it yet, but that's what I've heard. Dave.
Just want to say I'm very supportive of continuing to support the flow, and I don't think the cost difference is that great to move to a best practice kind of policy. So I would support the administration, however they would like to do that. I think is the best method.
And the question is that, George?
I'll make a motion then that we allocate the amount of money that's been proposed. When it goes on that sheet that shows what changes we're asking that can be made in the budget. So we're not actually approving that if it's time to approve the budget. I don't know what that sheet's called.
Yeah, we've got I'm not sure what we call it either, but we do, kind of retain an ongoing list of changes the council would like to see made to the budget. And then it's our job to work with your staff to try to find the sources for those before we get to June 19th.
Okay, any further discussion on this? Just you, again, when it goes to that sheet, we're still $1,000 shorter than we were to start with. Any other discussion on that motion? Okay, then I'll call for a vote. Those in favor? Those opposed? That in favor is Mr. Stewart, Mr. Harding, Mr. Winterton, Mr. Sewell, Mr. Neck, and opposed, Mr. Bender. Okay, I'd like to move on now quickly to Miss Provo. I've talked with the administration and mayor and Wayne about this, and there are some proposals that are being floated out there, and one of those was to years ago. This was under the Freedom Festival, and as this has been discussed, there are proposals on ways to fund this. And the Freedom Festival, I talked with Paul Warner yesterday, and he said he was going to be taking it to the board of directors. To the board of directors, is that who's meeting today?
Meeting with the board of trustees first.
And so that he's doing that today, and he's going to get some input on whether or not they would be willing to take back the Miss Provo event and put it under their umbrella. And there would be some things that the city would consider doing. Mayor, do you want to talk about that, or do you want to wait till we hear from them?
Just that I want to help them as much as possible. And so my thought was, as far as supporting the Miss Provo pageant, it'll be easy to say the taxpayers, we're supporting the scholarship piece for sure, because that's easy. I mean, to fund that aspect of it.
So I heard on the news this morning that the National Miss America is dropping the beauty contest.
The swimsuit.
Yeah, the swimsuit.
The evening gown is still very much a part of it, which has some people still concerned.
That's changing also.
We needed that, so, and that's probably, it was nice to see Dave Sewell there, but I wish we could have all been there to just see it because even without them dropping it, I learned so much about how it's only 10% is the bathing suit, but now that's even, that's a non-starter now. So it's just, those girls work really hard and a couple of them, it's huge for their education.
So that's one thing that we can talk about then, if the mayor's putting that on the table, is having the city fund the scholarships. And that we don't know exactly where the Freedom Festival, do we want to continue to fund the program completely? And we haven't been funding it, but we've been giving it $10,000, of which about $5,250 has been going to scholarships.
So I'd like to, for the city to support them at least at that level. I just think of all the service that's been rendered over the years by these wonderful title holders. I remember Lisa K. Richardson came before us several times talking about her pornography education program. We ended up doing a joint resolution with the mayor and the school board on that. A lot of presentations in schools on that issue. She actually ended up getting involved in a national petition on that issue that collected tens of thousands of signatures and ended up changing the behavior of Snapchat. I thought that was a really cool thing of her influence spreading beyond Provo. We've had a number of other great title holders that deserve a lot. And I feel like in recent years, we've kind of kept this program a little bit at arm's length. And I've talked to a few of the title holders in other cities that serve even more than ours do, and ours do a lot, I think, have done a lot. But I was talking to Madison Monson-Wilson a few weeks ago, who was Miss Provo in 2016, I think. The year before, she had been Miss Springville Mapleton. And she had a good experience in both cities, but they used her a lot more there. The mayor was more involved, the city leaders were more involved in providing opportunities for them to serve. I think it'd be great if we went down that road, give them more to do to represent the city. The scholarship portion, I think it's helpful for some of the young women, but they put in an awful lot of time in return for that. It's almost like a job, really. Madison was telling me that between those 2 years, she invested about 1,000 hours in all the service and the meetings and ribbon cuttings and all that. So if it was just the money, they might do better off to just get a part-time job, because of the amount of time they put in. But I think it's wonderful service to the city. And I really think this is kind of a unique leadership generation opportunity. I don't know anything quite like it. Some of these young women are, it boosts their confidence, their communication skills. Some of them go on to do great things in business. I know there's one running for Congress now and things like that. So my personal feeling is that in our society, we're not yet to the point where women have equal opportunities for scholarships and women as young men. I don't think we're to the point where the glass ceiling has been fully shattered. As I look around in our city, first time in over 100 years, or I guess ever, we have a female mayor now, but we still don't see a lot of women involved in local government.
Not on the council.
Not on the council. There have been a few times when that's been the case. But yeah, over, at least since I've been here, there's only been two, one for a short time and one for a couple of years, and we don't have any right now. If you look around at department head meetings, I don't think you see very many women there either. And in local business meetings, again, it's pretty lopsided. So what I'm trying to say is that I'm strongly in favor of providing this unique leadership and scholarship opportunity for young women. But if it was just that, I wouldn't be in favor of the city doing it. But we get so many benefits from it in return that I just think it's a great partnership.
Any other comments, George?
In support of what David had just said, I'm 100% in favor of supporting it to the tune of 10,000 what we had before. But this program gave back to me when I was mayor in those 4 years was far in excess, worth far more than that, I felt. The service that she gave, before Miss Provo came there, before the zoning was there. So I think it's money well spent, and I think it's just I really applaud Mr. Mayor Paget for getting rid of swimsuit. That was my biggest concern.
Mr. Hardy.
I appreciate the thoughts that have been shared so far. I'd like to give kind of the counterpoints to that. Said that scholarships being, using taxpayer money on scholarships is easy to explain, and I respectfully disagree with that. I would have a hard time telling people that you have to pay your taxes, and then we're going to take those taxes and use it to pay for a scholarship for for the winner of this program. I think this is a great organization. It provides service to community. Some of the participants, scholarships would be very helpful for their education. And that only be true, but we have a lot of great organizations in the community. We have a lot of organizations, young people, old people. We have a lot of different organizations. A lot of them are providing great service to the community. We have a lot of people in the community that have great educational needs. We don't fund scholarships for them, and I think there's a reason. I think funding scholarships is great. I just don't think that that's necessarily something that this city should be doing. I agree that in the past few years, the city has kind of distance away and has not been utilizing the winter as much as they could. But I think that's perhaps a reflection of the changing values, the changing priorities, perhaps in the community. And based on that survey and based on conversations, there's a portion of the community that doesn't feel like Miss Provo should represent the city in some of these functions. And so, and as far as I agree that opportunities available to women are still lagging, but I don't personally think that this is the best vehicle to bring about equity there. And if we felt like there was a need there and we wanted to design a program that encouraged young women to get into community service or into local government and all of those things, I would support looking into that. But I'm not comfortable with the relationship that we've had, and if there's a transition period, I understand that, to provide a little bit of stability as we separate, but I can't support the continued relationship between using taxpayer money on this program.
I'm really not in favor of calling it a scholarship, that we're paying for the scholarship personally.
Okay.
To me, it's contract services. We're contracting with them for the services that Miss Provo gives back to Provo.
And Mr. Millwood, isn't that, I think that's a legal stance that we need to take also as far as getting the services for the money that we give. We can't just give scholarships. Is that right? There has to be some kind of contract, I think, or contracted service.
Potentially, I don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head. I think, so to be specific, we're wondering, do we need a contract with assuming that we continue to fund it with scholarship funds, does there need to be some type of contractual arrangement? I'm not sure. I think it could be a gift that maybe doesn't require that.
I'm not in favor of, you're misinterpreting what I just said. I'm not in favor of doing a contract for scholarships. I'm saying just an agreement between whoever it's sponsoring, if it's a freedom festival or between the city and them
Oh, an agreement between the sponsor. I see what you mean.
Pay $10,000 for the Miss Provo pageant. They're taking responsibility.
I don't know that it changes my, this is off the cuff. I think we might need to do some research to make a determination on it, but it seems to me like you can make gifts. I don't know that you need to necessarily have a contract for that type of.
I'm not saying, if you need one, you need one. If you don't, I'm fine. I'm just in favor of allocating $10,000 in the budget for the Miss Provo pageant.
Either way.
Okay?
You start defining those contract services, and I think it opens a can of worms. Then we have to get competitive bids, we have job descriptions, we have to have all those things. I mean,
Okay, I'm not saying that we're gonna do a contract service.
I think that's what your words were.
That's what I feel like we're doing. We're getting in return for supporting this Provo pageant, we're getting help from this Provo organization to our open houses and all the different things they do. So I wasn't proposing that we have a formal contract. So I was just trying to clarify with our attorney. I agree with you. You don't want to get into that. We funded it in the past for $10,000. There's some way we've been able to fund it legally, morally, ethically. So I'm just proposing to continue to do what we've done in the past.
Hey, did you say, you have your hand up or not?
I would support what George just said.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second on the table. I'd like to make a substitute motion. My motion would be to wait on this vote until we hear from what Freedom Festival would be willing to do, and if they're willing to take it back under their umbrella, or if we have to do this as a city, then I think we could have a discussion on whether this is something that we want.
Can I accept that as part of the motion?
So,
My intent was anyway to wait till after the Freedom Festival.
okay,
This is where they're gonna take me about.
so would it be all right with you if we tabled this for 2 weeks? To have it, so that we'll be in the budget for this time, you know, we can get funded, but we can get information from the Freedom Festival on that, if it wants to go under their umbrella, or if, and then we can have a discussion as a council whether it is something that we want to actually continue to support and fund. I make the motion that we table this for 2 weeks.
Second that motion.
Any other discussion on this motion?
I have a final thought, but I can do it after we vote, whichever.
Go ahead and make your thought.
Okay, just, I think maybe this kind of highlights the dilemma. If perhaps there's problems with funding a scholarship, perhaps there's problems, you know, funding it as contract services. I think I would probably prefer bids and whatnot, but I'm uncomfortable morally, I'm uncomfortable ethically funding this, particularly out of public money, whether we call it a scholarship or contract services. I just want to go on the record to say that, but I will be voting in favor of the motion to continue.
And we will bring back to the council. In the past, we've had a contract with our city, with Miss Provo. And I think one of the problems that we have had as a city is that we have not defined to Miss Provo what we expect. And I think that that's on us to actually do that. And so I would like to also postpone this for 2 weeks, but in the meantime, bring that back and say, these are our expectations of Miss Provo. I don't think we've been fair to them. And they've wanted to help and we have not used them. And so I think if we take that opportunity and define how we would like to use them, I think that would be work for them.
So who's going to define that? You want the administration, the council?
I think, Cliff, and we have you guys, you've researched already some contracts.
I think the one contract we found was from the late 90s or early aughts.
And I think that if any council members had interest in saying what they would like in a contract, I think that's something that we can, I think that we just need to have more clear expectations around this program and the asset it can be. Dave?
With reference to the Open City Hall survey, as far as the negative comments, the best of my recollection, almost all of the negative comments that I saw there in the regards to Miss Provo and in the couple of emails that I got that were similar had to do with the aspect of very by physical parents, that they wanted us to move away from that. And I really think we need to step back and kind of let this news today soak in. And that's not going to be part of the program anymore. So
I appreciate that. We're going to go ahead. Dave.
Just clarification, is not judging on physical appearance, is it just the swimsuit part that's going away, or is it even the evening gown? Because that's also appearance. It's just different.
They're changing the evening gown. They could probably address it more, but they're going to be allowed to wear whatever they want for that portion of the competition.
It's called evening wear.
Yeah.
And
right.
it's about boys. How well do they present themselves?
But still appearance. Voice is part of it.
If you can have boys and not be beautiful, so not specific person.
Thank you.
There was a quote from the new leadership that specifically said that it's not going to be about physical appearance.
Thank you. We have a motion on the table. Table this for 2 weeks. And second, those in favor? Okay, that passes unanimously with George Hanley excused, and he was excused on the first vote also. Okay, thank you very much. We will now move on to item number 2, a discussion on appropriating $160,000 in the general fund and Parks and Recreation Department to fund needs in the recreation section. Mr. Henderson, thank you for being here. Thank you, dear.
Thank you for this opportunity to present on this budget item. I'll kind of be part of the introductory aspect of this, and then Bryce Merrill, our Recreation Center manager, will come in and finish the presentation. On this concept, sometimes we're inclined to move to celebrate the problem solver in our government. And at the Rec Center, this is a new paradigm for us. We have found that success management can create even more dynamic decision-making requirements as we go through this. We're really motivated to keep this amazing story going. Every day we work at increasing our positive impact in our community while increasing our efficiency. And we'll get into this in further details, but an example of a success impact is our credit card merchant fees. Our charges are up this fiscal year $40,000. These are the transactions that we pay by people coming in to utilize their cards. So it is completely caused by more people wanting memberships or paying for the day. And obviously our revenue is way more than these merchant fees are. But in government, we operate on appropriations. We don't operate on a checking account. So our budget, as you guys are deep into the budget, though, these are estimates and they create appropriations, but sometimes the real world has a knack for getting into our operations too. So success created the need for an appropriation adjustment, and the extra revenues more than exceed that we've already taken in, exceed the ask. So this is a great spot to be in, but is definitely an example of that success type of decision that we need to make to keep this great storyline going. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to the true Parks and Recreation talent in our department, Bryce Merrill, our Rec Center manager, and he'll go through the analytics on this request.
Thank you. I just wanted to give a quick brief overview of where we've been for the last few years so we can sort of understand the context of the ask today. In 2014, you can see our began the rise of our revenues at the recreation center, mostly through memberships and day passes. But in the last 4 years, while we've seen a consistent 8 to 10% year-over-year growth in revenues, our operating costs and expenses have remained relatively flat. This year, the trend has continued. We are up as of May 31st. We are up $225,000 in revenue over last May 31st, as well as over our budgeted amount. And so we are having a very successful year. The members continue to come and celebrate and enjoy the recreation center, like Scott was mentioning. But of course, the increased revenue is actually increased use. And as we see our allocation, our budget allocation remain flat, we've been sort of faced with a choice. Do we increase the amount of money that we're able to spend to provide the level of services that our patrons are accustomed to, or do we decrease the quality of services? And obviously, I'm sure y'all are aware that could lead to some trust issues. In the case of maybe child watch staff or lifeguards, that could lead to safety issues. Or it could lead to us artificially capping our success story, cutting off and just saying we shut down on June 1st because we're out of appropriation for the year. We're going to start closing the rec center at 6 p.m. Some sort of mandated cap on the success story we've been able to have. Nationally, our rec center, we have a association and industry reports that help us know how efficient we are compared to other recreation centers in the country. With our current budget, we are $5, and they do it by square foot, so you're comparing apples to apples. We're $5 per square foot less in operating costs. We spend $23 compared to the national average of $28. For staffing, we spend $15 per square foot of staffing compared to the national average of $16.43. We have the national leading cost recovery rate of 117%. What's even more exciting about that part of the story is that includes $400,000 set aside for future expenses, which these other facilities don't. So that number is actually even more efficient. And that's something we really pride ourselves in, is being good stewards of those tax dollars and very efficient with the way we spend money. We also have 5 times the national average of daily users, which goes beyond speaking to the square footage and speaks to the level of services we're providing. We're very confident that our residents are getting an incredible value for the dollar they spend with our recreation center. So as we look at some of the specifics of what we're asking for, the ask is for $160,000. Where does that all go? For staffing, which is the bulk of our expenses, it goes to frontline services. No money from this appropriation would be spent on administrative support or back office positions or anything like that. All of the staff would be spent giving and delivering better services or higher quantity of services to our residents. The easiest example of that is fitness. We've expanded to 162 classes per week, week in and week out, that patrons are able to take across a variety of fitness formats. We average over 23 participants per class, which again is way off the charts for industry average. So these classes are full, they are well attended, and this is the main driver of why people choose to buy a membership. They find a community or a class that they enjoy, they find an instructor that they connect with, and they continue to come back. Another big part of that is our child watch services. Being Provo, Utah, we have a high number of gym users that are only able to enjoy the facilities if they have an on-site, easy-to-access child watch service. And so we've expanded that in January 2017, and we continue to need to increase the number of staff to maintain the ratios that we are comfortable with. You might see other facilities in the industry that will take 1 staff and 30 kids and close them off in a room and sort of hope for the best. And we, again, we just won't operate on that standard. And so as we continue to maintain the ratios that are recommended by the state for babysitting and childcare facilities, we sort of mimic that with the way we supervise our patron and our residents' children while they're with us. Stogo is another example. We have over 2 million visitors a year, and each one of those visitors is coming in, they're showering, they're using the restroom, they're walking through the hallways, and so it is an incredibly consistent operation to maintain the level of cleanliness that our patrons, again, have come to expect at the rec center. And then finally, we have a number of programs and classes that have proportionate levels of staffing. The more swim lessons we teach, the more swim lessons we need to hire. And that's a great example of not wanting to cap our success. We have residents that want to take swim lessons. They want their children to be safer. We just need to have more swim lesson instructors. All of those costs are covered by the revenues that we bring in. It's just a matter of matching the revenue increase to the expense increase so we can provide the service we're interested in. For the costs that are not associated with personnel, some of our line items, like Scott mentioned, are merchant fees. That is $40,000 additional that we are paying to Visa. That's covering about $1 million increase in credit card swipes from when we last had an appropriation increase for merchant fees. This is that 3% that you pay to get your Sky Miles or your Chase Rewards or anything like that. Concessions has gone up $11,000. Again, the revenue is up $20,000. We just have to have money to buy a few more churros so we can sell a few more churros for our residents. Supplies has gone up $18,000. Most of that in consumables that is based directly on traffic, things like toilet paper, hydrogen peroxide, gym wipes, other things like fitness mats and fitness bands, equipment that is consumable based on use. And then finally, we've seen a number of special events to connect with the growing population size. Simple things like our Legacy Week, some of our fitness challenges that have relatively small budgets that act as a service to our residents. Up to this point, we haven't had an appropriation increase for 3 years, and we've been able to make it. I want y'all to know Scott's management style especially is for us to be a partner and leading out with the council on that. And so we've dug really deep into the appropriation that we have to find those cost savings. That's how we've been able to survive for years without needing this increase. And so some of the things that we've let out on are utility efficiencies. We're now purchasing our natural gas in bulk through different contracts. We have a lower footprint on our electrical bill through different LED savings and timer savings and everything like that. We swapped custodial vendors a few years ago, buying the same products. We're able to save about $20,000 a year. Concessions, we just did the same process a few months ago. We eliminated one of our administrative staffs 2 years ago and replaced that with a lower paid more part-time staff that would again face directly to the patrons. So we've really looked for ways, and I wanted to make sure that we didn't come for this appropriation until we felt like we had exhausted the resources we had to make that happen. As we look at future growth, it's still really exciting. We still feel like we are moving in the right direction. We're having more people come and join us. We have 1,000 more, and this is the most exciting number to me, 1,000 more resident members in May 2018 than we did in May 2017. So not only are we serving more people, but they're Provo residents, are the ones that are paying for this, the ones that it is our primary goal to serve. And so that tells me we have long-term and sustained growth ahead of us. We're sitting at just under 25,000 members right now. We just introduced the Triple Play a few weeks ago, and that's been very well received by our patrons as we look for additional ways for them to enjoy the value of their rec center dollar. Comparing when we announced it from May 18th to May 31st, we saw a $30,000 increase over the same period last year. That is a big number for our membership to see that kind of jump in 2 weeks based off of one that tells us that people are excited about it. We can anticipate future growth and use there. We're also really excited about the functional fitness that we're adding as part of the Triple Play. We know that, like I said, is a big driver in the membership purchase decision. We're confident that will continue to bring them in. So as we look to ask for the $160,000, I want to stress it is covered by the revenues. The patrons, the residents have expressed that they are interested in the services. We just need to have that appropriation from the revenues we've increased to be able to provide the level of services that they are comfortable with and have come to expect at the recreation center. That's all I have.
I don't understand why this isn't part of the base budget coming in from the mayor's office. Why are you coming for supplemental appropriation? Why isn't this just, usually the process is why it goes to the administration, but it needs to come as part of the budget. So why are we hearing this?
So this is, we do have it in next year's budget, George. So that was part of the budget process for next year. So this is an appropriation now to get us through the end of this current year to match with those trends that we've come in.
Go ahead. To quote a movie, if I can quote it correctly, you had me at hello. I mean, to me, this is like someone coming in and saying, "Hey, I want to buy a $300 membership," and say, "I'm sorry, we can't take your $300 because we can't spend the $9, whatever it would be, to cover the transaction." I mean, that's just silly. You're providing great service. We have lots of more revenue than we expected, but there are some additional costs, and more than covered by the. I mean, it's a no-brainer. You mentioned earlier that the real world sometimes gets into our operations. Well, if this is what the real world does to your operations, bring it on. You guys are doing wonderful. To me, I mean, this is exciting to hear, but maybe it's a little bit of what George was saying. Why are we talking about this? Let's just do it. You oversold it. It's great. Let's do it. Let's just do it.
Dave?
Really appreciate this success story. I like being success, so I'm very supportive.
Question about, you said in the last 2 weeks, we have gained, does that have anything very much to do with Seven Peaks not opening?
Seven Peaks was also closed for a big portion of the early summer last year as well. They had a chlorine accident. And then the Seven Peaks traffic typically manifests itself in day passes. So a family that's looking to entertain themselves for an afternoon, they'll come over and spend the $5. We think the membership is directly related to seeing a long-term investment with us. And that's actually the money or the dollars that we follow the closest, because we know those are the people that we build relationships with, or the residents. So there was actually a drop in our day passes in May. I mean, a couple $1,000s, so almost equal. But I would say, I mean, we even talked a little bit about, another recreation center that's opening up a couple miles away. And so we're very excited to see our residents continue to invest with us and, express that trust that they're going to have a great experience here.
About 30,000 was just in membership.
Just memberships.
Yeah, and then you're exactly right, Chairman, that we're going to see, especially 90 degrees, what we're seeing right now, and the parking lot was completely full yesterday. We are seeing other revenue areas just as strong as what we're seeing in our membership costs also.
I moved the report to 164,000 in 1917, 2017-18 budget for the recreation department.
160,000?
Whatever it was, 160. 164, wasn't it?
160.
160. Any second? There's a second. Any other discussion?
Is this a motion for the next meeting, Taylor?
Yes, it is on the agenda for tonight. So, yeah, I think it would be appropriate to make that in the meeting tonight rather than right afterwards. Well, are you comfortable with that, making that motion tonight? Or do we need to do it? Maybe we don't even need to do it tonight. It's already there. What's that?
Whatever you need.
I think it's a done deal. I don't think we're not going to have any worry about it, but I think, are you planning on being here tonight, one of you, or both of you? Yeah. I just think for the presentation, for the public's input, I think it'd be nice to have that story told to some degree. And so if it's all right, I'd like to, George, if you're willing to make that motion tonight, they're willing to come back to allow it in the public meeting where the public is here, and I think we'll have a pretty good public here tonight. You okay with that, Kate?
Yeah, but again, I think the motion's already applied. It's good to do it tonight. Presentation would be good, probably more beneficial to the public than to us.
Yeah.
So I think
If it's a plain motion, you don't need to make a motion.
Yeah. So we will move that. It'll be on tonight's agenda. Thank you. We now move to item number 3, discussion of rental dwelling license fees. I think one reason I'm going to go back to that one, but one of the reasons that we have to do that tonight is there has to be a public hearing to take it out of the general fund. And so that's why we need to have that meeting tonight also. Gary, thank you for being here.
Thank you, and it's always a pleasure to follow parks. And frankly, who needs the rec center? I've lost 3 pounds sitting in here with you this afternoon. It's a little hot. I just left my office. It's actually 84 degrees in my office right now. So it's a little cooler over here. We have a little PowerPoint. It should be... So the last time we were here, we were talking about some budget items with community development. One of the requests was to come back with a little more information, as much information as we could in a short period of time on, there we go, our RDLs and some of the revenues and numbers and things that we have. We knew it was a short turnaround. We wouldn't have a lot of time. Does this work, Kelsey, with that?
It should. If it's not working.
Okay. And so what we have is right now we have 695 rental licenses in the city. That's the current number that we see. And that represents a total of a little over 1,200 properties, and which represents almost 2,000 rental units. Okay, so that's where we are right now today. One thing I couldn't get in the time frame that we had was our revenue numbers. As you know, with 360, with our previous system, we can't generate some of the information that you'd want. And as we converted that information and put it into our new Kayenta program, getting that information out and having it accurate, we just didn't feel we were ready to come back with confident numbers for you on the revenues that we have. Yes.
Do you have a rough feel for what proportion of the 695 are single unit versus multi?
I don't on that either. Most of the units out there are multi-units. One of the things that you need to remember is if someone owns a duplex, for instance, and they live in the duplex and rent out the other side, they don't require a rental dwelling license. Yes.
So it came to my attention that a survey was done in my neighborhood that reportedly 700 units found that didn't have a rental dwelling license currently.
Could be. Yeah, I don't know. We didn't do that survey, so we know there are units out there that are rentals that do not have a dwelling license. But some of that may also be issues where it's an accessory apartment for 65 and older, and some of those things that currently aren't required to be licensed and we don't license.
I'm just going to point out that 2,000 rental units, that seems to be about the number that's on Craigslist right now. So probably, represents just a small percentage of the rental units in Provo.
That would be my guess.
A rental unit can have 200 apartments.
One of the licenses, so on that one license, I get a license, I own one property, and it has 200 units on my property. That would be one license for a total of $60. So I believe it's a rental license. If I own a home, let's say I just go out and buy a single family home as an investment property, and I rent it out, that's a $20 fee. If I have more than two, then I start paying, I pay $60. And okay. All right, so this is from the census, just to give you an idea of some census numbers. It says in Provo, we have just over 32,000 households, and approximately over 19,000 of these households are rentals. Now, but that includes group housing and things like that too. So to have a drill down and get my arms around exactly what that is, I don't know what it means for us, but those are some of the census numbers. And so if you look in Provo overall, as a whole, we have about a 40% owner occupancy rate. That a housing unit is owner occupied. And so it's about 60% are rentals in Provo. And depending on the neighborhood you're in, that can go up or down. Okay, so some enforcement issues since January 1st of 2016 to June 5th. We have a total number of 380 occupancy cases we've worked on. Some are closed, some are still open in that period of time. And we have 183 cases that have been open during that period of time. Again, some have been closed and resolved, some are still open, where somebody has been renting without a license. Now,
Gary?
yes,
If they don't have a license, they were never inspected for any kind of safety.
correct.
And do we know if the apartment that burned on South State Street had a license?
No, it didn't. And it would have been an illegal unit. Okay, so license fee, 1 unit 20, 2 or more 60, and you pay a late fee of $25 in Provo. That's what we have. We did look at some other communities. Some communities mix in a variety of things. Some have good landlord programs. Some do per building fees, per unit fees. One community has an agent fee that if you don't live in the county, and I believe this is St. George, if you don't live in Washington County, you pay a fee to have a registered agent that we would deal with. So just quickly, some of the things that Ogden does, they have a license fee of 50. If you're in their good landlord program, which we don't have, and you're certified, then you pay 10. Then there's some late fees. Ogden, again, they have their license fee, and then they have a good landlord program. You can see some of the differences there. We looked at Salt Lake. Salt Lake has a base $147 fee and do some per unit fees. And again, good landlord program that reduces some of those. We even looked at smaller towns, see what some of them are doing. And St. George, oh, and this is where they have a $10 agent fee. Keep them registered. So that's the information we have been able to get right now for you. The revenue numbers and things, we just weren't confident enough by today to really bring in those numbers to you. But that gives you kind of an idea of the possible universe of issues that are out there. Questions?
Just stay consistent with what our goals have been as far as covering costs with what we're charging. Where are we on that? And I mean, are you thinking that it's justified to raise that because of the cost to service the rental license agreement we need to, or where are we?
That would be my guess, is that we would be justified. When we went through and looked at it before, originally when this was enacted with a $20 fee for a single family home and then $60 for more than one, even then, we didn't think that we were recouping our costs back then. So we do have some issues with initial fees, and then going in and doing a renewal might be a cheaper issue for us to deal with. We haven't had the time as the council's gone through and asked community development to look at a lot of its fees, fees in different areas. We've gone in and done kind of a pro forma of what it would cost us to do, what it costs us to do for the different types of applications we take, rezonings, project plans, things like that. We just haven't had the time to be able to go through and do anything like that.
So, with just over 19,000 rentals in the city and about 2,000 that are licensed, it would seem like there's quite a few potentially that are not licensed currently.
Yeah.
And the unofficial study in my neighborhood showed about 700, and it would take additional manpower to actually do something to have greater compliance rather than just handle the current paperwork. So how would we pay for the additional manpower? By the license fee or some other mechanism?
Well, the license fee should take care of the work necessary to administer a licensing program. Our licensing fees can't be used as a way to generally raise revenue for the city, but you can use a fee to recoup your costs on the licensing to run that type of a program.
So the licensing and the enforcement of having a license are separate?
No, that would be part of it.
Okay.
Personnel, I guess the question is, he's asking, is personnel part of the cost?
Yes, it's the biggest part of the cost.
So I'm just wondering if we're factoring in, if we're looking at what should the fee be in the future, do we need more manpower? Because right now we're seemingly not catching everyone that needs to have a license.
Yeah, and what that might be in a good estimate of how many rentals that would qualify, because not every rental qualifies to have a rental dwelling license. But of those that do qualify, what's the number outstanding? I can't give you a great estimate today. And that's why we just put up those numbers from the census for you to see. It's going to be a significant number, but how many that is, I don't know.
So right now, you do have working enforcement to handle, what, 100 cases as a caseload? Or if you said, I need to go out and actually address 700 or 1,000 of these citywide, how many people would you need to do that?
Well, and it also depends on how we approach it. Enforcement for many years in Provo has been done on a complaint basis. So when someone drives, one of our enforcement officers drives down the street, merely by looking at a house, they can't tell if it's owner occupied or renter occupied, or if the cars that are there because somebody's having book club, or it's indication of an over occupancy, things like that. So as we find out about and have reason to believe that there are violations, we follow up on them. But we haven't gone out proactively and gone through a neighborhood and said, knocked on every door and says, is this a rental?
So part of that survey in my neighborhood was like, one person in American Fork owns 30 different properties or rentals in Pioneer, for example, and none of them are licensed, apparently. So there may be another way other than going door to door, just by going through records.
Yeah, but we haven't done that because there's been enough work for us to do with the complaints that come in. So it's kind of one of those policy questions for the council of how do you want zoning enforcement and rental dwelling licensing enforcement done in the city? Do you want it to be ratcheted up and much more proactive, or are we doing it on a complaint basis? As problems come in, we hear about it, we work through them and deal with them.
So I think you touched on this a little bit, but occasionally we get email from concerned residents that they aren't getting response from their landlords. They're not, their living conditions are poor, or they just visited a friend and there's health hazards there and whatnot. I do think that while we're looking at the RDL program, we consider what's part of that licensing, and perhaps that licensing. It sounds like there has to be an inspection at the beginning, but how regular are those inspections? I think we should look at that, because I think that will affect what the price needs to be for that. It's depends, it's the scope of the program, basically. We should look at the scope of the program when setting the price of the fee.
And the scope of the health safety issues is fairly limited. And the state legislature came in and limited what we can look at and do things. Provo and Utah in general has been very hesitant to go towards a property maintenance code, which is what you find really in a lot of other communities. So a lot of the calls we get, somebody complaining, oh, my landlord is doing this or that. The answer at the end of the day is you're going to have to talk to your landlord about that. That's a private issue between you and your landlord.
Gary, I appreciate the information you brought to us, and this is obvious that we need to have some more study done and some more discussion around these issues. and we will be bringing this back to the council. We do appreciate what you brought to us today. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to item number 4, a presentation on reinvestment for the shops at Riverwood. And we have 15 minutes, Dixon, for this discussion.
Everyone has the, just bring up the ones just basis.
So the council will remember that we've having an ongoing discussion with our council about projects that may be asking for or coming to the council at some point for an incentive request as the various facilities look at upgrades, remodels, and major overhauls. There are representatives here from the shops at Riverwoods today, and if given the opportunity, they would like to share some of the things that they're doing. So the incentive that is being requested for this particular project, the shops will be investing anywhere from $9 to $11 million, and they are requesting an incentive or a reinvestment of city sales tax revenue of $1.5 million over 15 years, $100,000 a year. We would cap that at 15 years or 1.5 million, whichever was reached first. This proposed structure on this one is slightly different than some of the others, where it's been a 10-year deal, half going back to the facility owner, and then the city sharing 50-50 on that. This one's slightly different in that it's 4 to 5 times larger, the investment. Some of the other investments on the Parkway and at East Bay have been closer to $1.5 million of the investment. The opportunity to recoup all of that or a portion of that. Where this one, again, as I mentioned, is anywhere from 8 to 11 million and asking for 1.5 back. So that is slightly different. Not requesting any property tax on this, just sales tax only. So it's post-performance. Right now, it's about a $20 million center. They would have to double that, and they'd have to have that they had to double it and sustain that over the 15-year period to get back the 1.5 million or 100,000 a year. Now, of course, if they're wildly successful, which we certainly hope they would be, they'd be able to earn that back sooner than they're done as far as the 1.5. So if that happened at year 10, then the deal would be done. They are proposing a variety of additional space coming online with this, and I'll have them kind of give a little history of some of the things that they've done in the past, more recently, what they're hoping to accomplish with this request, and some of the things that they may be doing in the future. I believe we've talked to most of you about this generically, obviously now with a little more detail. And so the request would be to the council is to authorize the mayor to negotiate an agreement between Provo City and the Riverwoods on the terms that I've mentioned.
Dixon, help me remember, we don't have any CDA on this as far as property tax code. This is all clear.
Not at the shops at Riverwoods, no.
Anyone have any questions?
Okay.
Maybe this is a question for the people from Riverwoods. On the proposal to go first year of 50% sales tax or a sales increase in tax, and then just there on looks like a 1.5% increase the next 15. I'm just trying to understand those numbers. Is the expectation to increase sales 50% after the initial improvement? The investment of 10 million is it going to jump 50% that first?
Well, of course, their hope is obviously the sales will increase dramatically, and I mean, again, a doubling of the of sales is actually very dramatic, as you can imagine. So it's just a straight over the baseline. It would just whatever is over the baseline, that's what they would be eligible in that particular year. And again, it would cap out at 1.5. So I mean, if it went like totally crazy in the first year, it's possible that they could earn that in the first year. Not very likely, but in the universe of possibilities, that's where it would be. So again, it caps at 1.5. If it only built slowly over the first 5 or 6 years or whatever, and then really met its stride in the latter years. Again, so the proposal is for 15 years or 1.5, whatever happens.
I just trying to understand why that 50% was used in
the previous ones.
For the first year.
So you're talking about the other deals that we've done.
Right here, it says current annual sales for entire center 21 million, which generates approximately 105,000 sales tax. If a 50% sales increase is accomplished the first year, okay. And I'm just wondering, that's a huge.
Yeah, I'll let them address that.
Then. Year increase, and I'm just trying to understand why that was used or what are the expectations.
Hi everybody, my name's Jeremy Blickenstaff. Good to be with you. Happy summer.
Why don't you come up here?
Yeah. I think, in answer to your question, what we're contemplating here is the immediate acquisition of this theater and a remodel, but then phasing out these builds. And so it's not that we can instantly add 60,000 square feet from times zero. So it's going to be phased in, and those sales, therefore the sales tax will ramp up over time.
Well, yes, 50%.
I just don't understand why this was used in the presentation, because it doesn't seem like that.
That was an example. That was an example of a possibility.
But not a real example.
Well, I
mean, is your expectation to increase sales 50% in the first year?
Well, in fairness to myself, when we did the presentation on East Bay, I showed you 4 different examples, and each one of them was a doubling and ultimately a quadrupling. Whether that happens in the first year or not, I don't know. I'm just saying that is a possibility. Is it likely? No.
It's one way to get to that $1.5 million over 15 years. But it could ramp up slower. It could do a lot.
My only question is that doesn't seem realistic, and there's some information I don't have to,
Okay,
expect that.
My apologies that I used a poor example.
So what would be a real example? That 1.5%?
A 1.5% increase in year one? I think more, definitely more. Once this theater is remodeled, it will, what is it, JJ? 6, 7, it'll be a 6, 7x what its current revenues are right now. So that'll take, it's anticipated that will take about 6 months to fully remodel. And from that point on, it will be on a run rate that is 6 to 7 times what it currently is on, just on that building. We're meeting with broker. These other red squares represent 6 additional tenants. In total, this phase is going to add 60,000 square feet to our gross leasable area in the center.
Which is what right now, Jerry?
192,000. It's going to push us over 250,000 total square feet, which is significant because it opens the door to tenants that we haven't previously had access to because of our size. It's going to add 450 new stalls. The theater remodel is going to, it's a massive overhaul. It's going to rebuild all of the stadium seating. It's going to all be reclined seating. It's going to reduce the seat count by 60%. It's going to combine several of the theaters into a large format IMAX size screen, take it from a 12 to an 8 screen. State-of-the-art sound, projectors, the works. A lobby revamp, an exterior revamp. That's just here. This is a three parcel upgrade from the macaroni grill space with double drive-ins. This is a convenience store and gas station that we've been approached by our brokers with. This is either a 1 or a 2 tenant parcel just to the north here. That's what we've got contemplated with this.
Retail or office? Or
retail. None of this is office. This is all retail.
Retail include restaurants?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Thank you. We're excited. We're excited.
Back to the poor example. I guess part of that was to show the magnitude of what they'd have to do to perform. So right now, to double the center, in order for them to reach that $1.5 million, they'd have to double the center. And again, if they can do that in the back end, they'd have to even more than double it if they're not at the short end or the front end of that. So again, I do apologize for the poor example there, but it's part of that is to show that this is performance-based. So if they put in their $8 to $11 million and do very little over the base, they get absolutely a little bit over the base. So it's nothing up front, and they have to perform in order to get anything back out of it. In order to get what they'd like to do, they have to double the center on average for the 15 years. And that's going to be an uphill climb. Again, in comparison to what's happening at East Bay and on the Parkway was hoping to bring on additional space. This is a center that's largely built out. Okay, so they're at a, what, 180, 190? They're going to bring on a quarter as much space. So that's a pretty big uphill battle. And I guess what we're trying to show with that is that this is a request that's different than the other three. But again, if you look at the performance-based opportunity here, it really puts all of the burden onto them, not us. And if they don't earn it, then we haven't given up anything.
I like this. All these performance-based incentives, my biggest concern is where are we establishing the base? And, I see some of the things that have happened out at Pump 2, Pump 3, the mix. And I wonder where that base was established. Is it established?
So we would contemplate going back within the last year. Now you remember that Tucanos was there, and they went out for a number of months and then was replaced with Rodizio. So we would anticipate probably something that would be after Tucanos leaving.
After Tucanos
leaving.
Yes. And while Rodizio is in.
Yeah, but you have to understand that Rodizio hasn't hit the same, just establish an expectation.
But it's not vacant, is all I'm saying.
Correct.
I see some places that are vacant and that's the base, so I would like to.
Well, and again, all to the challenge that they have to do. That if this was a 50% vacant property, they would have probably a much larger upside to capturing that. Where this is most of what you're seeing is 2 new out pads, a significant remodel. The Romanos or the Macaroni Grill is vacant right now, and the AMC is probably not performing as they would like it to perform. So again, some opportunity, but it's not like it's vacant right now.
Which, by the way, it was less than 50% occupied when we acquired the property.
I also have to say for historical purposes, so this facility's been in place now for 20 years, and there have been no sales tax or property tax incentives on the shops at Riverwoods. They've mostly gone it alone. The Riverwoods current ownership doesn't have dozens of retail centers across the country to draw from. This is kind of our local's own type of facility, even though it has some national tenants in it. This is a local developer who is not, again, worldwide or nationwide or statewide even. And so operating a one-off is challenging. And again, that's why we're in front of you today to say this is something that we think is worthy of consideration.
So we haven't supported this, like you were saying, with the sales of property tax over the years. However, it's been impacted by Orem taking 2 of the best tenants.
To its detriment. Yeah. Absolutely.
And offering incentives and stealing business.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, any other discussion? If not, we will. This is, again, is this on for tonight?
No.
It's on, we bring it to
We're anticipating, hoping that it would be on the council for 2 weeks to authorize again the mayor to execute an agreement with the shops at Riverwoods.
I was going to say, I think this has been a local success story. I think this center has been exceptionally well managed. And I'm excited that they're swinging for doubling sales. Really it's good from their side. I'd be supportive of this.
So I guess the motion that we'd be looking for then is to bring this back to the council meeting in 2 weeks. George? A second for that? A second by Mr. Connect. Any other discussion? Those in favor? That passes unanimously. Thank you. And Now we will move on to item number 5, but first, Cameron, I gotta put on my hat here. We appreciate you being here today. And
We recognize that a red and blue tie is the best you can do. So.
yeah, we understand that. And we're grateful that you're here. A blue year, look at that.
That's right.
So, council members, Cameron is infamous or famous, however you put it, for unapologetically declaring his loyalty to the U whenever he gets up in front of the ULCT. And so I kind of baited him a little bit and said, make sure you show the colors as a former graduate of both universities. So he came with his red tie. He'll probably tell us about it. But then I baited you with wear blue.
I was more happy to take the bait because I'm wearing the University of Utah socks. There you go. Yeah. Good job. But I always appreciate the opportunity to come to Provo, and I applaud your hats. In fact, you may not know this about me, but I actually. You might get. You can tweet that. Yeah. Go on. You may surprise the new athletic director. He may not realize our colors are red yet, so you may be able to play it.
Consider you called Utah State in his press conference.
Yeah. Oops.
Oops. Not quite your words.
But thank you very much for having us. I have a very soft spot in my heart for Provo. All jokes aside, I do. For example, I'm wearing my Provo lapel pin for the office of the mayor because Mayor Capuzzi, both of your predecessors actually were league presidents during my time at the league. Both Mayor Curtis and Mayor Billings were presidents of the league. We've had multiple Provo City Council members who have served on our board. And actually, my grandmother grew up here in Provo, went to Mazer School, and I'm thrilled that the Mazer School apartments are still here. Her apartment building is long gone, but the school's still there, and she died a couple of years ago. But she always wanted to go back to Provo, and we would drive her around the city and let her see how the city had changed through the years. My wife is a BYU grad. My mother was a BYU grad. I am obviously a Ute, but the only arguments we've had in our marriage so far between my wife and I have been Utah BYU. You laugh, it's a true story. Thank you very much for having us. We appreciate the opportunity to come speak about legislative issues that affect Provo City. And tell me, Mr. Chairman, how much time do we have?
Yes, thank you, Cameron. We have until, let's see, that's not right.
We have about 30 minutes less.
30 minutes. Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
We've come prepared to talk about a handful of bills that Cliff asked us to discuss, and then we're also happy just to take questions about what we see coming in this 2019 interim, the 2018 interim for the 2019 session. Wayne has now stepped out, but you have a tremendous staff here. And we appreciate the involvement of your staff with us in our legislative efforts. We are a small shop. We only have 10 employees. I started the league as a legislative intern back when Mayor Billings was president of the league. I have held multiple positions in the office, was appointed to be the executive director last fall. And we have the equivalency of 10 full-time staffers. And we represent every city in the state. We take that very seriously. And we rely on the staff of our cities and elected officials of our cities around the state. Wayne Parker has been a tremendous asset for Provo City. He's been a valuable friend and colleague to me. Isaac has hit the ground running, and so thank you for sharing Isaac with us throughout the session. He was at the Capitol on a regular basis. Brian Jones serves on behalf of the league in Provo City on several committees. Cliff has been great. You really do have tremendous staff, and it's because of the work that you do as elected officials and you do as staff that the league is successful advocating for you at the Capitol. We've been asked to talk about several issues. Rachel Otto, who is our Director of Government Relations and starting in December, will tackle a couple of them, and then I'll come back and talk about a couple more, and then we can open up to questions about what's coming in this upcoming session. We hired Rachel in December to be our Director of Government Relations. Hopefully you all received her daily emails during the session and still receive our weekly Friday Facts email. Rachel is also a University of Utah law grad, and she worked for West Jordan City and South Jordan City in their city attorney's offices before we hired her away from West Jordan City. So she understands the unique challenges that big cities face, and we've been excited to have her and did a phenomenal job advocating for you during the session. So Rachel, I'll turn it over to you to tackle a couple of issues, and then I'll come back.
Just want to echo Cameron's respect for your staff and how much easier they made our jobs. This session, Isaac and Wayne were great to work with, and we went to Isaac many times to get a sense of what was going on in Provo to make sure that we were working in line with what you needed. A couple of things that Cliff asked us to talk about. One was HB 36, which was free expression regulation amendments that Representative Thurston saw through the session this year. And then the second one was SB 120, the transportation utility fee bill from Senator Henderson. So HB 36 from Norm Thurston was actually a bill that the league worked on with him in the 2017 session, and it simply ran out of time. It reemerged this year, and what it basically does is, and I know you guys have had some personal city experiences with this, but essentially what it does is codify what the constitutional requirements would be into the Utah code. So it permits a city to put reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions on expressive activities, as long as the ordinance is in keeping with what the Constitution would require. So it allows you to either create an ordinance with all of your standards in the ordinance, or create an ordinance that then allows you to develop rules and regulations that would, of course, also guide people through what those reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions are. So outside of those two avenues, you may not restrict free expression activity outside of a public building. So any questions about how that is intended to work? It enacts another title or another part under Chapter 11, or under Title 11, sorry, it enacts a new chapter under Title 11, and defines some terms. It defines expressive activity and what reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions would be, and it kind of just, outlines what the constitutional process, what the Constitution requires, and then leaves it up to the city to determine what those reasonable restrictions would be for certain public locations. So it's fairly straightforward, and hopefully will be pretty straightforward to implement. Representative Thurston may be looking to expand that in future sessions. I'm not exactly sure what he has in mind at this point, but I will definitely be reaching out to him to see what he has in mind as far as potentially conduct inside public buildings and other areas of concern, or other areas that might be used for public expression.
So does this open our rec center then up to public, to campaigning? And does it open it up to initiatives? Is that,
as long as it doesn't open up Title 20, which is the election code. So any expressive activity that's regulated through the election code, like during, if it's a polling place or something like that, would remain unchanged.
There's a committee of staff, different departments, most of the major departments and legal are working on an ordinance for the city to comply, to make sure that everything is in place. Brian Barrett is representing the council staff.
Great, and I'd love to hear from Brian as this process moves forward and to the ordinance.
So campaigning for elections is not part of this. What about signatures for a referendum?
You would be able to collect as long as it wasn't interfering with Title 28.
And explain to me quickly, if you can, possibly, what does Title 28 mean?
That's the election code.
That's the election
So that,
code.
yeah, and that,
So if
that,
somebody has a referendum that they would like to do, it's not the election code, that's not individuals,
that it is on the ballot. So it is part of an election, so I don't really understand the difference.
I think it would depend mainly on the timing of when they were collecting signatures, and outside of the, whether it's outside of a polling place or something like that, it's, directly before an election, or any kind of timing restrictions that would be placed under the election code would be separate from what this bill deals with, which is expressive activity outside of those time periods.
In simple terms, there's a requirement that we have to provide some location on public property in order to allow for that signature gathering or the campaigning or whatever, right? The idea being that we can set reasonable boundaries to allow for it while also restricting the ability to impede progress.
Yeah, so you wouldn't have to let them, for example, let people stand right in front of the doors to collect signatures and basically make contact with every person who walks by. But you would probably have to provide a space that's, within distance and within a place where they can, talk to people. But you can put that kind of reasonable space near the building. It doesn't have to be, they don't get to block the entrance or anything like that, if that helps.
So I've been added to the committee kind of midstream, so I'm working a little bit on the formation of the ordinance. Correct me if I'm wrong. The way the statute reads, it's just codifying what the Supreme Court of the United States has already said. This is a public forum where people can have their expressive activities. And at least as I look at the rec center, to use that specifically, that is the exterior sidewalk of the park. It's not going to be the egress sidewalks or any part inside the building unless we say so. And I think, at least from my point of view, we have to be very careful about that, because once you open something as a public forum, it is that. It's going to be that. And you cannot discriminate by way of viewpoint. If you allow some expression, you have to allow all expression.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it really comes down to what a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction is, and how your attorneys and how your staff and how you as elected officials want to kind of make the policy around that, and what the restrictions really are. So, the constitutional question comes down to, is the restriction that if you are going to place restrictions on somebody, for example, collecting signatures in front of the rec center, is it reasonable? And that's, there can be a lot of nuance there, but, to your point, you obviously, if you do start making restrictions, and that's why it's good to have a great ordinance that guides people regardless of the viewpoint, so that your staff or you are not asked to make decisions each time different groups come in and they want to use your public forum. You're not kind of remaking what that looks like or what those reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions are depending on the group.
So, someone's running for office, typically there are no signs or campaigning on public property. And what I'm seeing here is there's a difference between someone running for office, which is an election of an individual, versus gathering signatures for a something on the ballot, an invalid initiative, which is, even though it takes place at the same time where you go to the polls and vote, you're not electing an individual, you're expressing an opinion on legislation or whatever. So they're viewing it differently as an expressive thing rather than a political thing.
Right, I think you're right, unless we get a court decision that says otherwise, that this is more of a campaigning issue and less of free expressive activity. You're under these different constraints, different constitutional constraints.
I think the bigger issue then is, because we could take up a whole time talking about this, we could always have somebody come back and brief the council. I think the bigger issue for us is the transportation utility question.
Okay. So SB 120 this year, we had numerous conversations with Senator Henderson as this bill was working its way through the process. Isaac Paxman was involved in all of those, and this was really good. I mean, we were able to discuss with Senator Henderson the excellent methodology that Provo used to enact its transportation utility fee, and really stressed to her the importance of a city like Provo that has many that has many public entities that use the roads that wouldn't normally be taxed through a property tax increase, and how you were able to kind of look at that, develop the methodology, and then work out a really good solution for your transportation utility fee to take care of these repairs to critical infrastructure. And she was receptive to all of that. She made it very clear that there are legislators who would like to see something like this transportation utility fee concept completely, prohibited in statute. So, and she did not want to go that direction. She wanted to work on legitimizing it by actually putting it in statute, which did occur, but also was very sensitive to the arguments by the county that the county should not be taxed. Of course, there's a viewpoint disagreement on whether or not it's a fee or a tax. And I've certainly heard some legislators say that they're supportive of these kinds of fees, not just a transportation utility fee, but other user fees. And some legislators who have been very clear that this is another way to tax entities, and it's a roundabout way to increase taxes. So where we ended up with SB 120 was trying to craft the language pretty carefully to allow city, it's interesting, it enacts a new chapter again under Title 11, and it doesn't go into details about what a transportation utility fee is or what it should do, but it essentially just says this is, it defines transportation utility fee, and then it says that a municipality may not assess a transportation utility fee on any public entity created under Article 11 of the Utah Constitution. So that exempts counties, and it exempts chartered cities, of which there's only 2 left in the state of Utah. So we wanted to narrow it so that you didn't also have school property and other property owners who are traditionally tax exempt make the argument that they were not, they shouldn't be assessed the fee. So it makes it easier to defend the fee now that it's actually in statute, but you do have this carve out for county and chartered cities. So we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if we see this fee coming under attack in future sessions. But again, Provo has a really great story to tell about the transportation utility fee and how you went about doing it. And so I think that that's very helpful for the session. Or I think right after the session we heard that there are about 9 or 10 cities who have implemented the fee or were in the process of implementing a similar fee. So we'll see how if they can uphold the high standard that Provo set for how you guys went about it. Questions on that one, or any other details you wanted me to discuss on that?
Please keep us posted on that one. That's, to me, that's an important one for me.
Yeah, we will. I mean, as we work, more and more on transportation issues and getting new road money, but there's still a shortfall for communities who are, kind of in a similar position as you of not having enough money to go around to deal with their VNC roads. And Cameron, I know you wanted Cameron to talk about the property tax, I believe.
Right.
Wastewater, okay.
Perfect, thank you, Rachel. I've been around since the beginning of the transportation utility fee, and the line in the sand for us that Rachel made clear with Senator Henderson with other legislators was that we were going to fight tooth and nail to preserve Provo's authority to enact the transportation utility fee. Wayne can attest to this, that we've actually presented to the Utah City Management Association and other cities, warning them about implementing the transportation utility fee if they didn't implement it with the type of methodology and the rigor that Provo has used. As Rachel said, you have a unique story to tell. Not every city can tell that story. Not every city should tell that story. So we were able to get to consensus to preserve the tool. We will definitely, we know that's a line in the sand issue for Provo City, and we will continue to advocate for it. We did have 2 cities during the session that held public hearings about whether or not to enact the fee, and there was major legislative blowback about those 2 cities. There were 2 cities in Davis County. Neither of them affected the passage of SB 120, but we do know legislators are saying we don't like this tool. They say that, yet they talk out the other side of their mouth and say we want to see more user fees for transportation. And one thing I'll add as we talk about the property tax piece that came up last year was that I spent my whole summer last year on the transportation task force. We met weekly. It was an insane process, quite honestly. You had stakeholders from across the board. Mayor Gary Kiki, former Mayor Gary Kiki of Cedar Hills, was the representative from the Mountain Association of Governments. We had one appointee, it was Mayor Jackie Biskupski of Salt Lake, and then I was at every meeting throughout the summer, and Rachel in her capacity in West Jordan was at most of the meetings. During that transportation task force discussion, that eventually became SB 136, the UTA revamp and the new prioritization criteria for UDOT. Well, part of that discussion last summer was an emphasis on user fees for transportation. So SB 136 created a pilot program for the state with the gas tax for a vehicle miles traveled pilot program that anybody can sign up for. Essentially, in lieu of paying gas tax, you would be in this program, and the state will work for the next couple of years to try to create this vehicle miles travel program. As part of the recommendations from that task force, we were successful, Andrew Jackson, me, and a few others, in getting into the recommendations the usage of transportation utility fees as a local government approach to a user fee for transportation. And we pointed out to Senator Henderson that the task force recommended cities use transportation utility fees, and yet here's the legislature trying to take away that authority or rewrote it. And she agreed. She said, you're right, that's inconsistent. I want to take care of this one piece, solve the litigation concerns between Provo and Utah County, and make sure you have the tool going forward. You wanted us to talk about property taxes. Part of last year's fund was not just transportation, it was also tax reform. Now, if Roger too were here, Roger's on our staff and he's been involved in tax policy for almost 40 years in the state as a former tax commissioner and then on our staff. He would tell you everybody talks about tax reform. Everybody loves to talk about tax reform. It sounds great until you realize that with tax reform comes the need to actually tax people who aren't being taxed. And as soon as that happens, the impetus and the momentum for tax reform ultimately falls apart. What happened last year was a little bit different. We spent all summer talking about tax reform at the state level, the federal level, and the local level. And the local level components that you need to know about were the local option sales tax, or 1%, and the 50-50 formula therein, 50% population, 50% point of sale. There were multiple legislators who wanted to put that on the table as part of tax reform. What they were offering was to say, we'll expand the sales tax base to bring in services like attorneys. And I'm not just saying that because I am one, but they want to bring in attorneys and other services that are not currently taxed. So we'll expand the base, and there'll be internet sales that will come in either through an act of Congress or through the Wayfair decision, which we're anticipating any day from the Supreme Court. So here's this new pot of money, which then facilitates a discussion of changing the local option sales tax formula of 50-50. That formula has been around my entire life. It was compromised in 1983. Wayne, were you around at that time? I didn't mean to out you there. It was a legitimate question.
I actually came to Utah in 1987, but I was involved in the
implementation, because it took a decade. Yep. And just so you guys know, the pot of money for local governments in 1983 expanded by 1/3. So it was real money. Well, because of federal tax reform last year, the legislature pressed pause in December on all of the discussions on tax reform. So there's the sales tax piece and then the property tax piece. But we actually did a presentation at the Utah Taxpayers Association last May, where the Taxpayers Association asked the question, has truth in taxation worked too well? In other words, are there structural reasons that discourage cities from using property tax through truth in taxation that then forces cities to rely on other revenue streams? And is now the time to reevaluate the truth in taxation process and include an inflationary component or some sort of annual adjustment? The Utah Taxpayers Association, I keep saying that because even though I watched it and witnessed it, I still wasn't sure it was actually happening. They had that discussion, and Senator Howard Stevenson acknowledged that now is the time to look at it. The Senate President, Wayne Niederhauser, acknowledged in November to us he was willing to have that discussion. And then federal tax reform happened. And as soon as federal tax reform happened, all of the tax issues went off the table as they affected local government outside of SB 136 with the transportation dollars, the fourth quarter and the fifth quarter that were authorized. You also had a unique political dynamic this year with Our Schools Now. And every time the legislature looked over its shoulder, there was pressure from Our Schools Now asking, how are you spending your tax revenues? Our Schools Now contacted us the last Friday of the session and said, we're working on a compromise that would affect the gas tax. My response was, it better include local government. You can't negotiate away our money. And I spent that last week in the session on the phone with Representative Brad Wilson and the organizers from Our Schools Now. And on Monday, they announced the compromise at our Legislative Policy Committee. In fact, they announced it to our policy committee before it was even finalized upstairs in the House of Representatives in the Republican caucus. And the compromise that they worked out is that voters will have the opportunity to vote on an opinion question this fall to increase the gas tax by 10 cents. If voters say yay, then 3 cents of the 10 go to local government, distributed according to the gas tax formula. Counties get approximately 36% of it, cities get up 64%. Then the other 7 cents would go into the state transportation fund, and an equivalent amount of state sales tax money that currently goes into the transportation fund comes back to the state general fund, which would then be freed up to be spent on education. Because of the combination of federal tax reform and Our Schools Now, all discussion about our local property tax was paused. The other piece on Our Schools Now is that they adjusted the property tax component and essentially created a base that will grow over time and will generate hundreds of millions more for school districts around the state. We'll see what happens in November. Our board received a presentation from our schools now right before our April conference. We have a board meeting in a couple of weeks. We'll be doing some follow-up on our schools now. And I do expect that the board will ultimately vote to support our schools now at some point in the process this year, because it's real money for local governments. For cities, it's approximately $36 million the first year that will be distributed amongst the cities. What that means for property tax going into the next session, it remains to be seen. The two senators I referenced, who we had convinced last year that the time was now, were Senator Howard Stevenson and President Wayne Niederhauser, chair of the Rev and Tax Committee in the Senate, president of the Utah State Senate, both of whom announced on the last day of the session that they were retiring. So, all that work, and thanks for the memories. Senator Stevenson's likely replacement is a tax guru who we have had these preliminary discussions with him. It's Representative Dan McKay. Not sure where he's going to be on the truth and taxation side. We've also been engaged with the governor's office. I have a meeting scheduled next week with the governor's office to talk about truth and taxation, because they were key stakeholders last summer, and obviously the governor will still be in office next year. So realistically, what will likely happen is we'll shift from kind of the legislative focus like we had last year, and we'll shift to the governor's office and then bring along new legislators once leadership is in place. We expect the next House Speaker to either be Representative Francis Gibson or Representative Brad Wilson. There's always a chance it could be somebody else, but right now it's likely one of those two. And Representative Wilson has already told us that he wants to tackle local sales tax. We've told him, no, we're not touching local sales tax unless there's sizable new money like there was in '83, and there's been no indication that there would be. He also has expressed major frustration about local land use policy. So we've been meeting with him. We have a cordial relationship with him, but we'll keep you appraised as that moves forward. The governor has made it clear that he wants to accomplish sales tax reform. By sales tax reform, we're talking expanding the base before he leaves office. He's up for election, or if he doesn't run again, it's a 2020 election, which really means the 2019 session is the session for a tax discussion. One other key tidbit for you to be aware, those of you who've been around a while, you will remember that a couple years ago, you as our membership voted at our conference unanimously in September a resolution calling on lead staff to aggressively seek ways to modify and modernize the truth and taxation process. So that's what we're doing. And we welcome additional resolutions from you. For those of you who are at our conference, Mayor and Dave and others, we started the caucus system. We're going to have another caucus meeting later this summer, as well as part of the September conference. And we want to use the caucus system to create resolutions to build the league policy platform, so that we're all singing off the same sheet of music, whether you're newly elected in Santaquin or a former mayor-turned council member in Provo. We want to make sure that everybody is on the same page on what the key underlying local government policies are. And the caucus system breaks cities down by communities of commonality. So Provo's working alongside Ogden and Layton and Salt Lake City, and American Forks working alongside Bountiful, and Saratoga Springs is working alongside Plain City and other cities that share these characteristics. That's where we're at on taxes. Any question on either the property tax piece from last year or where we think tax policy could go in the upcoming year?
Thank you.
Yep.
So we just talk about Provo working with other cities that maybe we share the same form of government or other common things. Provo being a college town, we have certain unique challenges which we're struggling with right now.
Absolutely. In fact, we were talking about the Pioneer neighborhood. When we walked in on law enforcement, I leaned over to Rachel and said, I'm driving you through the Pioneer neighborhood on the way back. Talked about code enforcement and towing and parking and transportation. And yes, Provo is unique. Ogden shares many of those similar characteristics. Ditto with Salt Lake and St. George, different degrees in all of them. But that's in part why we created the caucus system, so that you can learn what's happening in other cities that maybe could be used here and share ideas, and then make sure that we as staff, when we're representing you at the Capitol, recognize those unique characteristics. Towing is a perfect example where I've spent several years working on towing issue, and that's primarily just a handful of cities. And in Provo's case, it's mainly the college atmosphere to it. In West Valley's case, it's different. It's their commercial areas and abandoned vehicles. In Ogden, it's a combination of both. And so that's why it's important that we have this two-way dialogue, so that when legislators run bills that they think it's just a small bill that just deals with one issue. We could say, no, what you're really doing is running a one-size-fits-all bill that has all of these consequences in all of these other cities that you haven't thought of. So that's why it's important that we have this dialogue, and that's why we start the copy system.
I mentioned this to you before, but real quick, at the start, before the legislative session started this year, we had a breakfast with our local legislators in the state, and there were a number of issues that we brought up. Hey, what about this? We'd like you to look at this. And each time, the response was, well, what's the league think about this? Have you taken it to the league? And they really, they didn't sound like they really wanted to hear from us directly. They wanted us to work through the league on that. In part because of that, I'm now on the LPC.
Yep.
But I would definitely, maybe we can talk by email or something after. But I'd love to know, how can I put these items that we had concerns about? How do I get that on the agenda to be discussed by the whole group?
Thank you, Dave, for bringing that up. We've been in the process of modernizing the organization, because if you'd asked me that question, even though I've been at the league since 2006, I could not have given you a straight answer a couple of years ago. So what we're trying to do is say, first things first, participate in the LPC. The LPC, every city in town is entitled to 3 voting members on the LPC. So in Provo's case, you tell us who they are, and then they're part of it, and you bring ideas to us as staff. We share them with our executive board, and then those ideas, we bring them forward to the LPC of things to consider. In part, why we want to use what we want to use the caucus system for is to bring ideas through the caucuses and have those discussions, because at times the LPC can get big, and if every city sends all 3 people, it's a really big group. Caucuses breaks it down into smaller groups, bring up ideas in the caucus system, get buy-in from other cities. We can either put it in resolution form, or even if it doesn't go through the resolutions process, because most things don't, we still work through it, get consensus within our board through the LPC. You can use us to reach out to other cities to get feedback, and then ultimately it turns into legislation. Because what Senator Bramble wants to know is that if he's opening a bill file for Provo, he's not going to run afoul of other cities and have the league have to oppose his bill. So that's why you get that feedback.
LPC, Dave, is the administration,
There's no LPC in that.
So we have our 3 right now.
It's an open and public meeting. So even if you just have 3 voting members, anybody can be there. And Wayne, this will warm your heart, because one thing I've heard for years has been the need for an alternate approach. So one thing we're bringing forward to our board in June is a way to have an alternate, so that if the mayor is your voting member, or Dave, in your case, you're an elected official, part-time elected official, you have a day job. If you can't make it to a meeting, you could designate an alternate on your behalf to come. We've never had that in our bylaws before, so we're making a proposal to our board in June so we can get that squared away before the 2019 session.
And Cameron, I know they meet weekly.
During the session, yep. And we webcast it so you can watch it anywhere.
And how often are you doing outside the session?
We'll be meeting in June 18th. That'll be the first one outside the session. We don't meet in July. Apparently people have other things they want to do in July than sit around and talk policy. But then we'll be almost monthly from August until June or January once the session starts, and then weekly during the session. One other note, since I'm almost out of time, to put on your radar, and the mayor and Dave were in and I know everybody else was, so I apologize if there were others who were in this workshop, and I remember them because you guys both spoke up, is the issue of housing affordability and affordable housing. 2 different issues, one enormous concern for the future of the state, and in many ways for the future of our authority as local governments. Rachel and I spent the morning today with the Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce. They're working with all of their chambers around the state to elevate the discussion about housing affordability. Every city is required to have a moderate income housing plan. That's been in law since the early 90s. Not every city does it. Provo, I'm pleased to report, has kept up to speed with your moderate income housing plans. We did research last year and found that half of our cities were not complying with that requirement. We supported a bill this year that modernizes the requirement of those moderate income housing plans to make them more data focused. And we met with several entities yesterday that shared with us how you can actually make these reports rather than just have them be textual. You could satisfy the code requirement in state law with graphics and maps and other things and make it more visual so that you can see the disbursement of housing within your city. In Provo, my hat's off to you and your predecessors for creating a city where you have a diversity of housing stock. That's not the case in every city. And so what we're trying to do over this interim is make sure that elected officials understand that what happens in your city doesn't stay in your city, that you need to act locally, but you need to think regionally as well and think about the future and how all the cities fit together. If you look at what happened in California, Massachusetts, Oregon, Washington, now these are all blue states, not the BYU blue, but blue states politically, all of their legislatures have stepped in to remove local authority over land use to some degree. In fact, there was a bill in the California Assembly just last month that would give their equivalent of UTA, the BART system in the Bay Area, zoning authority. Thank you for that expression. You couldn't hide it. It just like immediately came out. But give BART zoning authority instead of the cities along the transit line. So you look at the great things that you guys have done here in downtown Provo. Imagine UTA having the zoning authority around the front runner station for, so you're shaking your head, council member, but this was our biggest concern last year during the transportation task force. It's still a concern this year. And so that's why we're working closely with the chamber to say, we don't want this sort of legislation in Utah. Let's work together to make sure that cities are thinking regionally as they're acting locally, and make sure cities have the tools of knowing what your housing stock in as you're considering different developments. So we have a website, or we have a page on our website about housing that we'll be putting resources there. The Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce will likely be reaching out to your city to come present to the council about the housing gap. And just know that's going to be really issue number 1 this session. Right behind it, issue number 2 is the issue of water. And particularly for a city of the first class, your first class city to us, but city of the first class legally, is the question of extraterritorial jurisdiction over your water up the canyons and surplus water contracts and the like. So the league has some positions on the Department of Natural Resources work groups that just started last week. And now I'm blanking on his name from Provo, who's Dave Decker. Thank you. Yeah, Dave Decker. Yeah. Hey, Dave, sorry. You're blocked by Gary, so I couldn't see you there. So Dave sits on the Executive Water Task Force. And which subgroup are you on? You're on surplus water? Okay, you're on both. Okay, perfect. So Dave's there for Provo. We also were successful in lobbying to get several other city officials on the work group. So we have city representation on each of the 4 work groups.
So you mentioned the affordable housing plans. Some cities, like to say, don't do it. And we do it, but I believe they're also scored and reviewed. And if they don't have a high enough score, then you don't qualify for certain funding mechanisms that are available.
So that's the California model.
Well, no, saw that in Utah.
In Utah, that's the case if you're applying, I believe, for money through the Department of Workforce Services. What's happening in California is they tie all state funding to whether or not you have the certain land use, and you'll have bureaucrats at the California version of the Department of Workforce Services saying Provo's plan doesn't work, therefore you're disqualified from all state funding. So here, I think it's just DWS and housing.
There is a particular housing pot of money that we didn't score high enough on, and therefore we didn't qualify. It's a fund that's been there for some years.
Was it Olin Walker?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yes. And so I've encouraged us to go back and make sure that when we do it so that we meet their minimum qualifications, because we've just fallen short a little bit by not scrutinizing the answers and doing it the way they wanted it.
That's excellent feedback. I was not aware that Olin Walker required that, but we'll be able to do that as well. We'll be doing a Wednesday web chat, Facebook Live seminar June 27th. We'll be holding this in days to come. It'll just be a Facebook Live with DWS staff and league staff explaining to our cities how to comply with the moderate income housing plan. So that's excellent. We'll look into that before June 27th.
Cameron, thank you so much for being here. I would like to have you come back more often.
Happy to do it.
And so we appreciate this. Has been really helpful and informative. So we'll keep in touch here.
Happy to do it. And we're going to go grab lunch and spend some sales tax on Snow Street. So before you invite us, we'll spend money down.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, both of you.
Council members, it's extremely hot up here. Is there a willingness to try and move the things down to the council chamber and have nurses working down there? It's supposedly about 5 to 10 degrees cooler. We've got 4 fans working down there, but it will take about 20 minutes to set up down there. So we could look at doing it after the break if you're interested.
This is miserable.
Is that miserable?
Oh, I'm dying.
Do we? Okay, I'm open to that. We were gonna cut our break down rather than expand it, but, if it's more comfortable, we'll do
We
it.
have to move the computers down, at the break.
Chelsea, want to move down? Okay, we'll plan on it. We'll please reconvene as soon as Cliff's ready. What do you think, 15 minutes?
We're gonna start working on it now, but he's got 20 to 30 minutes assigned.
So we're gonna go ahead with one more item.
Yeah, at the scheduled break, we'll go down if that's all right.
Sorry, you're right. Thank you. Turn the time over to Dave Graves. This is quite a deal that I've never been inundated with more emails since I've been on council than this subject. And so, Dave, if you'll help us with this, understand this a little better, we'd appreciate it.
Appreciate the opportunity to come and try to clarify where we're at on the Bulldog Blvd project, and hopefully be able to answer some of the council's questions related to that project. Just want to, we've got several members of our project team here, and we asked them to come today so that we'd have all the right people to answer any questions you may have related to the project. We've got Jonathan Knight is a member of our engineering staff. He's our city's project manager for this project. We have Tyler Turner, who is the consultant project manager with science. She is on the public information piece for the project, and John Higgins is the local village project manager. Just wanted to give kind of a little bit of a background on this, where this project was, and then I'll have Jonathan come up and actually talk about kind of where we're at today, before we get into the questions and answers. So this project, and this project was started quite some time ago. I'm not even sure if that's the right slide. Like we still have the old presentation in there. There we go. All right, so this project started probably 5 to 6 years ago. As we were talking about different things in the city, we're in the middle of doing an update, or just completed an update to the transportation master plan. And then subsequent to that, there was a bicycle plan that was also being implemented in the city. And there were a few other cities in the state who had done some different things with that, related to bike plans. MAG was very instrumental in trying to get a regional plan throughout all of Utah County. And so one of the things that we were trying to do, it was also kind of at the point where we started having the discussion about complete streets in the city. And so
As we started looking at this Bulldog Boulevard project corridor, there were some project goals that, you know, really were the driving forces for this. So it wasn't necessarily all about let's just put light lines on it. So, safety was a huge priority for this project and a huge driver for this project. As you heard, presentations, you know, the accident rate on this facility for the type of facility it is about 7.5 times higher than the state average. We'll talk a little bit more about what that is, what that means a little bit later. The aesthetics value, how does the street look, and you know, what's the feel? What do we want to try to create within the community was also a huge driver, and the complete streets issues associated with that were definitely part of that consideration. So as we started thinking about what Bulldog Boulevard is today, or was at that time 5 years ago, and what do we want it to be, we had one of our local artists go out and do some renderings that as we kind of sat and brainstormed about this corridor and what do we want it to look like. And you know, the idea of breaking up this big wide roadway, asphalt, concrete jungle out there was a huge driver in that. And so with the project goals in mind of safety and aesthetics, you know, separated islands, planted medians became one of those concepts that we felt could help us to accomplish simultaneously both of those goals. And this is just, you know, that rendition. This happens to be University Avenue is the street, cross street there, and we're looking up Bulldog Boulevard toward BYU. This is another perspective down at Freedom Boulevard looking north. So there were several elements to this as we started looking at it, and then started talking again about, well, can we make the bicycle plan part of this project as well? And safety, not only was safety for vehicles, but it was safety for pedestrians, it was safety for cyclists, safety for all modes of transportation users that were on that system. And so there were elements of that, such as, you know, these little areas of green that were in that concept idea phase of the project that were thrown out there to say, how can we better identify these conflict areas and make them safer, both for the vehicles as well as pedestrians and other users on this facility. The Bulldog Boulevard corridor, of course, extends from 500 West to Canyon Road. As I said, it had the crash rate 7.5 times higher. And
Dave, can I ask you a question? 7.5 times more than on University Avenue, or is that a state road that sort of doesn't count?
No, it would be on all arterial streets, okay, multi-lane arterial streets within the state. So University Avenue definitely could be one of those comparisons to that. Okay. You know, the study, we did some preliminary studies at that point in time, looking at islands down through the median of Bulldog Boulevard, and it was felt that the installation of those islands could certainly help with the reduction of some of those crash statistics and the high crash rate on that corridor. The roadway, as you know, out there today has 3 lanes in each direction plus a center turn median. That was implemented many years ago, even before I came to the city. And the best that we can kind of recollect, and as we've talked to different people, initially Bulldog Boulevard had 2 lanes in each direction plus a center turn median and then parking on the street. At some point in the past, the decision was made, well, let's eliminate the parking lanes. And so part of that was what can we do to make use of that pavement without having to go to a huge expense. And so our feeling was is that what happened was it was very cost effective, very easy for them to just go ahead and stripe a third lane through there. And that, of course, only runs from University Avenue to 500 West. You bet.
So what you said is the impetus for putting a third lane was to be the parking and not to be congested.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with traffic.
When you look at the roadways on both ends of this section of Bulldog Boulevard, you have a single lane with a turn median on Columbia Lane. You have State Street that does have dual left turns from the north, and only a single right turn lane from the south. On the east end, even the section between University and Canyon Road only had 2 lanes. And then at that time, BYU, the section up into BYU from Canyon Road East, had 2 lanes in each direction. They've since changed that to where they only have a single lane in each direction. Right there.
So there's, from a capacity standpoint,
It wasn't putting 6 lanes on that road wasn't necessarily the driver for that. We've verified that through our studies, through modeling, that it's really the intersections that control how that roadway is functioning. It's not necessarily the number of lanes on the section of the roadway. Okay.
Talk about aesthetics and safety. I'm all for safety, but going from 3 to 2 lanes for aesthetics is a different issue with my constituents at least. So couldn't we accomplish the safety issues and have 3 lanes each way by putting a medium in the center where people can't turn left to take that away, and it still would be safe, but we wouldn't be trading 98% traffic for 2% traffic, automotive versus bicycle.
But we could, and that would address part of that safety issue. It wouldn't address all of it because it would still not address the pedestrian safety. You know, we know that we have cyclists out there that would like to use the corridor. I think we've heard from some of them that say we don't use that because we don't feel safe.
But that's 2% versus the 98%.
Yeah.
The constituents that are talking to me at least.
Right.
They're not objecting to the safety.
Right.
They're objecting to us trading bicycle lanes for 2 automotive lanes.
But again, when we look at safety, I'm not talking about just vehicle safety. We're talking about safety for all modes of travel. So.
The whole issue of good streets is at what point do you make it safer for a very small percentage of the vehicle and traffic versus the major traffic usage?
Yes, and
it's a good discussion.
There's always trade-offs. That's for sure. You know, the current ADT out on Bulldog Boulevard is 27,000. Estimated in 2040 to go to 31,000. And that,
the last part of it was bikes as part. So the estimates that at some point we double in population do not include doubling in cars. I don't know what formula they use. They must figure that people in the future be using mass transit, using less cars?
Well, when you start looking at the modeling projections, we use a regional model, okay, and so it's taking all of the growth from all the different parts of our city, all the different parts of our county, and then putting them into that model. It's also looking at the destinations within that model, and so you're not always going to have, say you double population out on the west side. That doesn't mean that every road in Provo City is going to see double the traffic. It may mean that some of those roads out on the west side, they might see 2 or 3 times as much traffic. But many of the roads in the older part of the city, where maybe there may not be a significant change in growth, might not see any or very little growth. And so it's all part of this comprehensive model, and it's a gravity model, so it's kind of the best estimate. They do calibrate the model where they'll go in and they'll actually do counts on existing roads to see that the model is accurately representing, or closely representing what we have out there.
So if you're modeling where the growth is going to happen, and yes, we will have some on the west side,
yeah,
we're going to have a lot of higher density built along the BRT route, for example, and redevelopment in downtown. So if the modeling is to be accurate, it has to predict where that growth is going to be. I'd love to see where the growth is predicted, because as we do our general plan, we're not in sync with all these models. I'm not sure how we're going to grow intelligently.
Yeah, and the regional model is coordinated not only with Public Works on the project and roadway side, but also coordinated with our planning folks. And so our general plan is actually put into that model as well. And so they're telling the people at MAG that run the model, here's the areas where we see growth within our communities, and this is our best estimate at this time. And this is always an evolving process. As things change, the model's updated and then it's recalibrated. So, like the Provo High School movie, I don't think any of us really know for sure. Maybe there's a few, but I don't think most of us know what's going to happen long term or the next 5 or 10 years with that property. And so right now the model, the data that's included in the model is still Provo High School. Okay, and so that will be updated as some of that use becomes more clearly defined. Garrett?
So this thing, right now we have 27,000 ADT, and the 2 lanes will go 220. Is that what is the 20, the diet research?
This is just simply saying that when studies have looked at road diets is a term that's used for decreasing number of lanes or changing the configuration of a roadway. So on a two-lane roadway, theoretically you could have 20,000 cars a day, and
but we're getting 27 right now on 3.
On 6.
On 6.
It's 2 lanes each direction.
And it's 2 lanes, one each direction. Does that mean that a road with 4 travel lanes would theoretically support 40,000 as a linear?
Correct.
I don't know that it's completely linear, but it's close.
Yeah. That's probably something that maybe Tyler can answer later.
What kind of research has been done with the businesses to find out? Because that bicycle lane and the medium is going to affect your ability to turn into those businesses without question. I can't do businesses that I talk to aren't excited about that.
I'm not going to answer your question right now, but we are going to answer it. But I'm going to have Leah help us answer that. Okay. When we first started this process, about, I believe it was 5 years ago, Leah, something like that. We didn't have a MAG project at that point in time, but we really wanted to know, are we going down a direction on this roadway that we shouldn't be looking at? And so we actually hired a firm to come in and do some modeling And then we hired Leah's firm at that point in time to go out and start talking with businesses and property owners along that corridor. So I think she can give us kind of some of that perspective as well. Of course, the current design for the project is to install raised medians along the corridor to allow U-turn movements for everything but probably larger semis, those kind of things at the intersections, and then to repurpose the outside travel lane. One of the things that we've added recently, probably in the last 3 to 4 months, was a new signalized intersection at 400 West. And this was something that initially was not part of the project, but as Target came to the city and we started talking about, what's it going to take to make that site out there in the Riverside Plaza functional for them. They needed to have some ability to turn left out onto Bulldog. And we had spent probably 2 years before that convincing the hospital that they didn't need, that they could operate this fine. So, when that happened, we went back to the hospital and they were extremely happy to say, yeah, I think you made the right decision. And we've actually also visited with the 2 other businesses that would be immediately adjacent to that. And I think that was just last week. They were both really excited about this possibility of what this can do for the corridor and making ingress and egress out of those areas.
That's not right at 400, is it?
It's pretty close.
Yeah.
It's the main entrance to the hospital.
It's the main entrance to the hospital, okay, and that's where the signalized will for quarters and then for the State Farm Insurance Agency and for the drive-through to get to the back of that target area.
Sure. So other parts of the design, we have landscape buffers and the center turn medians, and then also to increase the awareness for pedestrians, bicyclists. We haven't gone to talk a little bit about the project schedule specifically, and then we'll get back into some of these specific questions.
So right now we're at about a 50% design milestone with our project. This means that we have plans that we're ready to sit down, a complete set of plans we're ready to sit down, look over, and make sure we've addressed all the design issues. We'll sit down with Dave, we'll sit down with all our design team, with John from UDOT, and make sure that we've got everything kind of ready to go. And then at that point, we'll advance to plan specifications and estimates. That review can happen fairly quickly because when we say a 50% design milestone, that really means that we're at about an 80%. And then to advance it to the next level doesn't take much more than really putting together your specs. And so that can happen pretty quickly. And then because we are receiving its Highway Safety Improvement Program funds from the federal government, we have to have those funds under obligation by the end of the federal fiscal year, which is the September 30th. And so we're kind of under a deadline here to advertise for construction late August, and then get a contractor on board in September, to then put it on hold a little bit until late winter. So we're talking February, March, depending on the kind of winter we have this coming season, to start construction next year. And so we estimate that we'll have about a 4 to 5 month construction time. Again, a lot of that depends on weather, depends on making sure businesses are taken care of during the process, because with the project, we are redoing all curb, gutter, and sidewalks along Bulldog Boulevard. So that includes driveways. And so we know that this will affect their functionality. We want to make sure that they're all taken care of. We're not shutting down someone in a peak business time for them. So that time frame is fluid, but we estimate it should still only be about 4 to 5 months. So we just wanted to kind of give you a quick kind of walkthrough of what it would look like. So the scope of our project goes from the Provo River Trail just just west of State Street there on Columbia, and it goes all the way to Canyon at BYU campus. And so our goal is to provide to improve the safety for all modes of transportation along this route. So you can see we have some intersection improvements here. West of State Street is going to get a little bit of a surface treatment, restriping, make it a little bit more clear and visible how the bike lanes transition. Especially now that we're adding the signal at 400, which is just east of here. We don't want that queue length to back up into that intersection. So having that second turn lane, left turn lane, will help us with that.
Question.
Yes, sir.
So coming from State Street going north, that right-hand turn, will it be 2 lanes and will there still be a third right-hand turn lane, or are we eliminating the right-hand turn lane?
So you're talking on 500 West?
Yeah, if you want to turn on the Bulldog.
So yes, the 500 West doesn't change. The only thing that changes right now is there's that little island that the signal pole is on right now. And so when you're in that right turn lane, you kind of have that feeling of I can do whatever I want. I'm just going to fly around this corner and get on the Bulldog. We're just taking that ability away. You still have the separate right turn lane. It'll be more signal controlled on the Bulldog. Yes, sir.
So it will not be right-hand turn when red, it'll be only when there's a green light?
No, you can still turn when red. It's just where right now it functions more of as a free right, where it doesn't matter what the light is. You don't even have to stop. You could just go. Whereas now you'll want to stop. You look, make sure there's no cyclists crossing the street, no pedestrians, because that right turn lane is going to cross the bike lane that crosses through the intersection. Any other questions on this intersection before I move on? Okay. So here's our new signal at 400 West. You can see it's more of really just signalizing the driveways here for the hospital, and then for porters here. And as was brought up before, this kind of alley is owned by Riverside Plaza, and so you can access around to get to the shopping center. And then porters, they were very excited to hear about the signal going in. Like Dave mentioned, originally we weren't planning on putting a signal there, and they were kind of upset because that eliminated their left turn for their tanker trucks. And so once we put in the signal, they were more than thrilled about it. So you can see here where Dave was talking about aesthetics. So where we have the space, we're putting in raised curved buffers in between the bike lanes and the travel lanes. And where we have the width, we're going to landscape these buffers here. The buffers between the bike lanes and the travel lanes will have nothing more than 2 feet tall, just for visibility, sight distance. And then as we move down the corridor where we have a little bit extra room in the center, those will get landscaped more with more trees, taller landscaping. Right here, because we are putting in the second left turn lane, we lose a little bit of width to be able to landscape the center median. And then through here as well, since we've added those left turn lanes.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Back on that light, we added a new light. That's really not serving Target or Macy's or Chick-fil-A or any of those.
It is serving Target.
out because they have to bring their trucks to the back.
Okay, it's still serving the delivery.
It's delivery.
But it's gonna really add congestion.
So Target was not gonna come until they had guarantee of some type of an intersection. And their first preference was out on State Street. There is no way, Dave can talk a little bit more about that. But as you can see right here, this was their very big concern. They want their traffic to be able to get back to the east because that's where they feel that all their constituents are, their shoppers. So they have the ability to come here, go left, and go out at a light, because you can't do it up here on the intersection, and you can't go left out of here. So we had to give them, and that's not just for trucks, that's for their shoppers to go back left, and that was very key for Target to be there.
So are those businesses going to give up parking to allow?
No, they'll still be able to do this, and admittedly to Target and to everybody, this is still not an ideal situation.
It's already terrible.
Yes, it is.
It's a little less terrible.
So now you can patiently wait at a light rather than play Frogger when you're right here trying to turn left, and that's what everybody does who wants to go left. They have to wait for a gap, and sometimes the day it's okay, but most of the times it's not. So this specifically helped Target, and they said, please don't eliminate that either. And so that it was very coordinated.
So if people are coming out of the shopping center and they want to get over to the light, they're going to drive through the parking lot in front of the gas pumps and probably queue up in front of those gas pumps waiting for the light and block the pumps. It's probably crazy.
So as Dixon said, we acknowledge that it's not an ideal situation, and if the gas station feels that it's becoming a nuisance, they're well within their right to put a hardscape barrier along their property line and force traffic around to queue up straight on. So that's something.
Back to the alley, back to
just behind the car wash, the little car wash. They don't have to go too far back.
I know that road.
No, we're all very familiar with it, you know, and like we said, we acknowledge it's not an ideal situation by any means. John and UDOT, they're really stiff about that Moon River intersection.
That's where they would go. They would go Moon River, along the river.
Well, they can't. That's the other thing is you can't left turn out onto State Street from Moon River, right? So what we are feeling is the people that frequent this shopping center already know the best way to get out of it. I mean, the first time I ever met Mayor Kafusi and we talked about this project, she said, nobody's going to use that. They're all going to go around through the neighborhood and come out on 300 West because that's what they've been doing for 30 years. You know, so this satisfied the desires of Target. It made the gas station happy. It made the hospital happy. So we acquiesced. We provided what they want.
And it functions, and Bulldog Boulevard functions.
Exactly. So the great thing about this signal is it's the only one that's not controlled north-south priority. So we'll be able to leave this green most of the time in the east-west direction. We don't anticipate any buildup or any holdup caused by this particular signal. Like you said, you will get the people queuing up ready to leave. They won't have an extreme amount of time to wait, but they will wait. But they will be able to left turn out without risking their lives. So we get to 300 West. So you can see now as we get a little bit wider in the center median, we'll put in some more landscape, some more adding to that aesthetic value. The bike buffers continue. So we kind of brought up the green paint. So this happens at all conflict zones. Anywhere where it's just one more thing to add to your line of sight, to add to your vision. Hey, there's something weird about what I see on the road. I need to expect something uncommon here. And what's uncommon here is that you have a vehicle that could potentially cross a bicycle path and a bicycle who needs to look out for a car that could potentially be turning in front of him. So it just goes back to that safety factor. We're looking to increase safety for everyone on the corridor, not just cyclists. The center medians have shown that by eliminating those mid-block movements, channeling all the left turns to intersections,
where you expect to see a left turn, where you expect to cross a crosswalk with your vehicle, that eliminates, or not eliminates, but reduces significantly those number of incidents that we see along the corridor. That's vehicle on vehicle, that's vehicle on cyclist, it's vehicle on pedestrian, it's also cyclist on pedestrian. And that's where the added safety for with the bike lanes come in, is it moves the cyclist off the sidewalk as well. A commuter cyclist will never ride on the sidewalk because it's too dangerous, not only for them, but also for pedestrians. And then you get those non-commuter cyclists, or people that just want to ride their bike from their neighborhood over to Target or over to Macy's or to Carl's Jr. They don't feel comfortable riding in the street. Well, the sidewalk's not really a great place to ride on this corridor either. I think I was with Tyler and Leah. We were just standing right here in front of Jiffy Lube talking with the owners, and we got run off the sidewalk by someone coming down on their bicycle. So it's really not safe for anyone right now. And so by adding the bicycle lane, by separating it from the traffic, putting that physical barrier between the traffic and the bicycle lanes, it adds the safety for the vehicles, it adds safety for the cyclists, and it adds safety for the pedestrians. Okay, then this is just a look at the Freedom intersection. Again, it's just kind of continuing that theme through with where we can add the wider buffers, we have them. Where we can landscape them, we will. Something like this where we have 3 drive approaches right next to each other. Unfortunately, we can only stripe, but we maintain that wide separation from the traffic.
Question.
Yes, sir.
So in front of, is it McDonald's on Southwest?
This one here.
So how many people can queue up in the right-hand turn lane before it blocks their entrances?
As many as can right now. We're not affecting how many cars can sit in this lane.
But if you get more than, I can't estimate the number properly.
You're probably about 5 or 6 before it starts blocking this entrance.
Right, but then beyond 5 or 6, you're going to be stuck out in the traffic lane. Which is the same as it is today.
Which is the same, correct. Okay, so this is a little bit wider block. This is the one block we don't have a signal on Bulldog Boulevard. So here we are blessed to have a lot longer medians, a lot wider landscaping. We are going to add in this right turn lane, so we'll be moving that curb. That's currently the Provo High School parking lot. We'll be moving that in to allow for this longer right turn queue onto University Avenue, so we don't get that McDonald's situation. So we can have, quite a few more cars queued up in here without backing up into the main flow of traffic. This one here.
Is that in out or just in?
It'll be in out. You right turn in, right turn out. And then the final block up to Canyon. So with this block, we have a lot less right of way. As you can see here, where that pink line is, that's our current right of way. And as we get up to in this last block, it moves quite a bit tighter. So we weren't able to add enough width to these buffers to warrant putting the buffers in. So we still maintain it's still considered a buffered bike path. It's just not technically a protected bike path because it doesn't have that raised physical separation. But we still maintain a separation from the traffic lanes, still adding to a higher level of safety for those cyclists. And then we've just been put in contact with some people at BYU who, now that this project is really, hopefully really happening, they're curious to see how we can help them plan to continue the bike lanes onto BYU campus and help them out with that. So just in summary, we did talk about this a little bit, 4 lanes of travel. Dave mentioned it's probably not a linear, like I've got it here as at 40,000. but certainly, enough to handle the 31,000 vehicles we expect to see in the year 2040. Based on our modeling, your peak hour morning commute in the eastbound direction, we're only estimating that it'll go up about 4 seconds. So really not at all. And then your evening commute is only we're only expecting it to increase by 40 seconds. I mean, so we're talking minutes here. It's not even, I grew up in Southern California, and to complain about a minute, 2 minutes is really, I don't know, it just, sometimes it's hard for me to look at and think, is this really a conversation we're having? But that's neither here or there. We're in Provo, Utah. That's the feeling of Provo, Utah. And so the center medians, as I discussed, we channel all that cross-traffic movement to an intersection where it can be controlled. Yes, sir.
A question about the projections there. Is that taking into account the additional light at 400 West and is still only
Yes, sir.
4 seconds?
Yes, sir. As I mentioned, that light at 400 West, if anything, helps us. It doesn't really add any negative side effect to the project. Then the buffered bike lanes help remove bicycles from the travel lanes, making the vehicles safer as well as the cyclists, as well as the pedestrians. And then facilitating active transportation complies with Provo's with our vision for complete streets. There's big talk right now. We are pushing through a complete streets policy. It's been in the bike master plan for the last 5 years. This goal to add complete streets. In fact, at TMAC, they're asking for accountability from the engineering department whenever we do a project. What are we doing to further the complete streets goal for the look and feel of Provo City? Active transportation is something that's, yes, sir.
Are you aware the complete streets has been approved by the council?
I am aware. I am aware. As I said, we're working on it right now. TMAC, just the TMAC has been asking for certain things. So it's, like you said, it hasn't been approved yet, but it's one thing that is at least on the forefront of your minds, right? It's an active conversation right now. And then we hear a lot, well, there's only 20 bicyclists a day on Bulldog Boulevard. And the fact of the matter is, they just don't feel safe riding it. So we believe that if we provide the facility for them, they will come, they will use it. We've been doing public outreach for the last 4 years, 5 years at least. And the consensus that we've been getting from the residents is that, hey, we would like to commute from along Bulldog Boulevard, or we would like to use it recreationally. We just don't feel safe. And so we may not see it now, but we believe that it's something that will witness an increase in the use of the active transportation facilities moving forward.
Have you come up and just talk about our EIF or maybe answer?
I'm coming back in the other car, not running away.
I'm not sure. So if you could, as you talk about EIF, maybe you could address Mr. Stewart.
I would be happy to. I don't have a PowerPoint. I have one slide to show you. But let me just tell you. So my name is Leah Harmio. I am a public engagement specialist. This is what I do for a living, communicate with the public. I've had the pleasure of working in Provo, either for Provo City, for UDOT, or for contractors on transportation projects since I-15 Corps. So it's about a decade almost now. And one thing that I really, sorry?
You're going to jump drive.
Again?
Again.
One thing that I love about working in Provo is that your citizens are really engaged and they want to know what's going on. And so we started this project in 2013 when, like Dave mentioned, when the Provo Bicycle Master Plan was approved and moved forward. We started talking about, is this really a thing that can happen, right? Does the lane conversion or road diet, I don't like to call it a road diet, but a lane conversion, does it make sense? And as we started looking at the numbers, they said, we better go out and talk to people because it's hard to explain how this will work. So in 2013, we went out and, or I'm sorry, in 2015, we went out and met with every business and property owner on the corridor, and we showed them a very preliminary plan. Brian Torgerson was the project engineer at that time, and he and I went out and met with every property owner there, all of the developers, and we talked through it. And there were some concerns about raised medians, and there were some concerns about consolidating access points. There were some concerns about right-of-way. We did look at the potential of purchasing additional right-of-way up to Canyon Road to extend that buffer all the way through. And the property owners didn't feel like that was going to be appropriate. And so we tried to account for the feedback we were getting from the property owners in the design so that city engineering could find the funds to move the concept forward. So what we were doing was really testing to see if people were interested in seeing this complete streets vision on Bulldog. In 2016, some of the funding was confirmed, and so in fall of 2017, we started our design process. So the open house that I'm sure all of you are hearing about that we had last 2 weeks ago is the very first step of public engagement for the design phase. Now,
how can we go that long when we're 50% complete? Give me a break.
So, well, Mr. Stewart, let me explain sort of the procedural part of how these transportation projects move. We cannot go out to the public and show them how something might impact them if we haven't got some amount of design and engineering. And so before we go, and I don't want to, right? My job is to talk to people, and if I can't explain, yeah, we might need, 3 inches of an easement to tie your driveway back in, or gosh, the road is going to change really significantly and we're going to need 7 feet to tie your driveway back in. I want to be able to have those conversations with people so they can really understand. So the design began last fall, and then the target conversation started happening. And so our team went back to the drawing board, looked at the intersection, looked at the traffic study again. So there was a traffic study in 2014 and then again in 2017, and then our team just reaffirmed that before we came out to the public on May 21st. So a couple of things. This is kind of a summary as of, I don't know, half an hour ago as we were sitting here, I was inputting the final ones, and I want you to understand that this is my read on it as a public engagement practitioner, as a communications practitioner. This is not the official final project designation of these comments, but in my professional opinion, we are at about, well, we're at 40 out of about 100 comments that are pro project. Some are neutral, and by neutral I say, they don't say I like the project or I don't like the project. They say I've heard about the project, I have some concerns, or what about this idea, or is this going to affect me in construction? So they have not deliberately said pro or against. And then these are the ones, some of the ones you're seeing, and I'm seeing the ones that are going to council as well. So I think you're kind of seeing a little bit of both. From my personal interpretation, what I really think what we're struggling with is this idea of congestion, right? It just doesn't make sense to the public that you can take a lane away and it's not going to make a great change. And the technical information that we have from our traffic study does show, we're talking seconds or minutes, not 5s or 10s of minutes. We're talking, less than a minute. But this is an environment in which people have a little bit of construction fatigue, right? We've had a lot of road construction in Provo in the last 5 years. And people were surprised to find out about it. And that may be in part our fault because we did inadvertently hold our meeting on an inappropriate day. And so we've extended our comment period. We've been pushing information out broadly. But also I would just like to let you know that we have used all of the same kind of notification mechanisms that we always use for projects in Provo. We did mailers. Stuff went out through the mayor's blog and on the social media feeds, through Karen in the neighborhood council, through all of the neighborhood councils as well. So we're getting a robust conversation. It's a good conversation that we're having, and this is kind of the result that we have right now. So our next step from a public engagement standpoint, right now our comment period is open through June 8th. So literally all we're saying is thank you for your comment. And then once the comments come in, we can look at them as a team, review what that means to the project design. There are likely some things that we've already considered, like the distance of a U-turn at the intersection. We've pulled some things around and made adjustments. But the fundamental question of whether you support active transportation or whether you support complete streets or you want room for cars is not really a project level decision. And that's why I think we're seeing sort of the responses that we're seeing. This is a larger community question than a project specific question. So I think that's why the sort of explosion of comments. Please, Mr. Stewart.
It's interesting. I've been on the council for almost 2.5 years. First time I really heard anything about it was reading the 5-year CIP plan a few months ago, where it showed that it was being a 2018, 2019 project. Oh my gosh. I brought it up in council too. So we had never been brought up before council in my time on the council. When you say we've engaged the public, you haven't even engaged the council.
So my understanding was that we did come to council at the beginning of our design phase, and that wasn't me, that was our engineering staff. Do you remember? I'm sure we can find the date.
I don't remember the exact date, but it was probably about 2 years ago. The council, we completed the project to clean out from the concept on we came into the council, kind of an informational thing.
To this council or this current?
Yeah. I mean, there's been a few things on the council, but several.
Well, there's no question. I'm talking about the current council. Current council have not been presented this program till today.
Yes.
I think that's. I'm sorry, but I think that's a dereliction. We haven't had a chance to see this project since 2014, 2015, whatever. I was on council then. Had I not brought it up 2 weeks ago, we probably would have having this meeting today. And then we're going to go into design in a month. I just think something doesn't compute with me on this.
Last year in the budget process, we had line item for our match for this project, for a portion of the match, actually spread that out over 2 years. So that probably was something that
it's a big document. I missed it last year. I'm sorry. I'm going to CIP.
I mean, we probably could have had that discussion last year, or should have had that discussion.
I just consider we're this far along. It almost seems like you got to go ahead. So far along, that's an unfair thing to our constituents and to the council in my mind.
So I would reiterate that we're at the beginning of the public engagement process for design, and we do have some design, but that's why we're here. That's why we're having the conversation. That's why we're pushing information out. We're taking the comments. We'll be looking at them. And so I guess my question, Mr. Stewart, is what is the root of the concern? Is it do we need to extend the conversation and have more discussion about it? Is there a root issue that you're the most concerned about?
I don't see how we can go ahead with so little public input a month from now. Talking about other issues that we've had on the council, we've had more than sometimes 4 public hearings. We've had open houses, and all kinds of. I mean, it's just really tough at this point to be getting the kind of dialogue we get from the constituents.
So I think it was last year that Fifth North, they did a kind of complete streets project. Maybe it was the year before.
Fifth West or
Fifth North, last year, rec center.
Is that you?
Yeah, so maybe it's been 2 years, but so it was kind of a mock-up and chalked out, and you could kind of see what it could be like. And so in discussing this with some of my constituents, it came up about, well, why don't we do something similar on Bulldog, where you put up some barriers or whatever it takes to simulate and model for real how it's going to work and get feedback that way.
It's a great question, and it's one that we've received by email as well. I mean, part of the issue is the way that our process works is that we are waiting until that June 8th timeframe to sit down and review all the data and the comments. So I'll leave that to the engineers to tell you if that's a feasible solution. In the same way that I'll ask them, we can have as many public meetings and hearings as we feel is appropriate. These are all budget kinds of questions. So I don't know, Jonathan or Dave.
Can I just take 1 second here, Dave? We are now 40 minutes over where our time limit is, and I can tell that this needs more discussion for the council at this point. And I think that we need to have some, can we bring this back in 2 weeks? Or even if the council members want to have a special session around this, we could meet.
That's we can set up if we want to. Kelsey dug up the last presentation was October 10th, 2015.
And I do remember the presentation, and at the time, I think we were in, we got to wait a little while. There was something, if I remember right, with state funding, that there was a question. Yeah, and so it was, and they said, okay, we don't know that we've got this, so we were figuring that out. And I agree with Stuart, this is really on the front burner now. And so I think we need to make sure we're having those discussions. Where do we go from here, I think? Dave, do you want to take a second? But I think we definitely need to bring it back within 2 weeks, or if we want to have another discussion next week, we can do that.
I have 2 more questions, and I don't know if these can be answered quickly or not, but one is, can you just break down the funding sources? So it's about 4.5 million total, right?
Yeah, so we've got 3 million in congestion mitigation or quality funding through AG. That's federal funding. And we also have 1.5 million safety improvement funding. That's state. State federal. So they're both federal funds. And then we would have the city's match, which is
6.7%. Okay, my next question, I think the biggest pushback that I've heard is there's this feeling that if you go between 2 lanes, that commute times are going to skyrocket. And some of the constituents have read in there that it's only going to be 4 seconds one direction, 4 seconds in the other. And I think several ones have communicated to me just don't find that possible. Do you have some kind of backup or
after modeling is that we are talking peak hour. So right.
Difference in other times.
Yeah. So most of the time during the day you may not see any. But they all look at kind of this scenario.
When a personal anecdote, when Dave brought me in on this project in 2015, I said, you want to do what? You want me to go out there and tell people that you're going to take a lane away? What does that look like? And they said, yeah, we're surprised also, but here are the numbers. And so we've been looking at the numbers, and we've been looking at the numbers consistently to make sure that it's making sense as changes on the corridor are happening.
It might be important to note that there have been 2 traffic studies prepared by 2 separate firms that have similar results. It's not going strictly off one traffic study, there's actually 2 that produce similar results.
Okay. I appreciate it. We're going to have to close this one down, but we definitely will have this back planned for at least an hour, probably. Don't you think, Cliff? We'll need some time.
This question, though, for me is how quickly also considering a motion or an action regarding this that would change the budget. My opinion on this, I'm trusting our engineers and engineers from this work. If the information that they're giving us is accurate, that peak commute times are only 4 seconds one way and 4 seconds in the other. It seems like a no-brainer to me. There's so many additional benefits to it. So I'm in favor of it as long as we're confident that was all.
And I can understand. I'm still not convinced on the safety issues yet. I don't know that we're not creating more safety issues by what we're doing, people crossing over I'd like to see some information on that. 7 times the number of accidents. I'm on University Avenue. It seems to me there's a lot more accidents on University than there is on Bulldog. But,
and we can certainly come back and talk through the traffic information. I know Tyler is ready to do it, but given that you have additional time, I guess my question is, when does it make sense to come back? Do you want us to come at a work session or a special session?
Yeah, here's my suggestion. Let me work with the administration and these folks and bring
okay, it's just important to the council that they have the opportunity to weigh in. Because I think it is, like Mr. Sir said, it is rolling. And we need to make sure that we're having the opportunity to express some of the things that we're hearing.
any of the reports that you would like email out so that you have a chance to look.
We will let you know we'll meet tomorrow. If you'll meet with them, get us a timetable, we will report back to you as soon as we get some information. Dave, let's go Dave first. Dave, connect with Dave.
I brought up the question of practical modeling, and I don't know if that would require a certain extra cost perhaps. And so in order for us to even consider that possibility, we would probably need more information, what it would do to the project to try to model it.
So one of the things that I understand about trying to model this is that like in some instances where you model just bike lanes, you can just show a block. But because we're talking about throughput on a system that is, all the signals are dedicated north-south, it would have to be more than a block.
So the traffic model includes the prior project limits and includes pedestrian activity.
So we would have to put out barricades in the medians and on both sides of the bike lanes, the whole length of the corridor to test it, which is fine, but it would be a more significant than some hay bales and like candlesticks like we do to fake a roundabout or something.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we can look at a cost estimate, some sort of projection. I don't know. Dave is like.
The problem with something like that, putting in these temporary facilities, is the volume of traffic. Those work great on something like Fifth North in front of the rec center when it was just, or in the neighborhoods where you're looking at, oh, do we put in a bulb out? Do we put in a bike lane? You can put up the hay bales, whereas the traffic isn't that high. On something like Bulldog Boulevard, where all of a sudden now drivers wake up one morning and there's Jersey barriers down the whole road, it's a big deal, and it could cause a lot of significant issues to do something temporary like that.
Okay, so I just thought I'd ask that question. And the other is, I didn't see anyone commenting on how this might affect snow removal.
I think we had one comment that they would plow lanes into the bike lane. Like I say, we're waiting until that June 8th before we really get in there, but it is a comment, and I think it's been a comment in other city
design process. I was doing
So there would be a separate snow removal on the bike lanes.
Okay, Dave, quickly, very good.
Sorry, I keep thinking of things, but I feel like we haven't done as good a job selling this. Like I feel like there should be excitement about this. It's overall. So I threw this out in the email earlier, but how does the council feel about going with the council staff trying to work with their engineers to come up with something that we can share on the website, that help people understand better?
And you know what? I think that's great. And I think before we can do that, though, we have to understand ourselves. And I just don't think I'm not there yet. So I don't know where everybody else is either at this point. So if we can focus on that, make, coalesce around some kind of a decision, then we can, if it goes to that route, we can, and we definitely need to inform all of it.
And that is part of my job And I will, when we provide you a brief for whatever the next meeting is, you can see all of the outreach that we've done today. Again, this is the first part of that outreach process. Once we know what the questions or concerns are, we can provide a lot more information.
Thank you so much for coming in. We look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Thank you. And Cliff, you want to help us out with the timing here? We've got some issues.
Yeah, we'll figure it out by the time we get to start, but let's move downstairs and come back at 3:15.
Reconvene at 3:15, so we got 3 minutes. Everybody run fast.
Find a cool place.